I've always believed that preparation is everything. You can't just drive into the wilderness, park your Volkswagen camper under a patch of pine, and expect the forest to welcome you. Out there, the wild doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care how many YouTube tutorials you've watched or how many fancy solar panels you've installed. The forest has its own rules, its own memory, and sometimes, I think, its own consciousness. That's something I didn't fully understand until last winter when I took my camper into the Klamath Basin near the Oregon-California line. It was supposed to be a solo trip, part test run, part escape. I wanted to film a few clips for my channel, talk about off-grid maintenance, maybe shoot a sunrise through the fog. But the trip turned into something else entirely. I left Bend early in the morning. The highway was slick, half frozen, half slush, and the world looked bleached out by the cold. My old 1978 Volkswagen Westfalia hummed along, steady but slow. The engine's rattle was familiar, comforting almost, like an old friend who never changes. I told myself this trip would be simple. 2 nights off-grid, test the new heater, check my water filtration, maybe make a fire by the lake. I had everything planned down to the detail. But the wilderness doesn't respect plans. By the time I reached the Forest Service road that cut toward the lake, the sun was already low. Thin orange lights spilling through the trees, breaking in ribbons across the snow. The GPS said 6 more miles, but the signal was fading. I turned it off and trusted my memory, the old dirt trail winding deeper and deeper until the pines closed in around me. There's a moment on every trip where the noise of civilization drops away completely. The hum of the tires fades, the air becomes still, and all that's left is the sound of your own breathing and the whisper of trees moving. I've always loved that moment, but this time it hit me differently. The silence didn't feel peaceful, it felt watchful. When I finally parked by the lake, the light was gone. I stepped out and my boots crunched through a thin crust of ice. Across the water, the other shore was hidden behind fog. I remember thinking it looked like another world entirely, one I wasn't supposed to cross into. I went through the usual motions, leveled the van, tested the generator, checked my emergency gear. Routine makes you feel safe, but safety is a kind of illusion out there. You prepare to convince yourself that the unknown can be tamed, that with enough checklists you can control the unpredictable. That night, I cooked dinner inside the van, beans, sausage, coffee. I kept the door cracked to let the steam out. The smell mixed with the cold air, sharp and metallic. Somewhere beyond the fog, something moved. It sounded like someone dragging a stick through the snow, a steady scraping rhythm, slow and deliberate. At first, I told myself it was just ice falling from a branch. Then, when it came again, closer this time, I thought maybe it was an elk. But when the sound stopped, the silence that followed was too heavy. Like the forest itself was holding its breath. I shut the door and sat in the dark for a long time. When I finally crawled into my sleeping bag, I could still hear faint movements outside. The heater clicked softly. My reflection in the van's window looked pale, almost ghost-like, flickering with each passing shadow from the fire outside. I told myself I was fine. I'd camped in stranger places before, but around 2 a.m. I woke up. No sound, no wind, nothing. Just that dead kind of silence that makes your pulse too loud in your own ears. Then came the knock. Not on the door, on the side panel. 3 slow taps, spaced apart, not like a branch falling, not like an animal. It was measured, human. I froze. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. The first thought that crossed my mind was that maybe someone had followed me. But there were no other tire tracks on the road, no footprints in the snow earlier. The knocks came again. I sat up slowly, trying not to make a sound. The van's thin metal walls felt like paper. Every creak, every shift echoed. My flashlight was on the counter, but reaching for it felt impossible. Then, nothing. Just stillness. After what felt like an hour, I finally worked up the nerve to peek through the curtain. The fog had thickened outside, and I could barely see past the headlights. But something was there, something tall, standing just at the edge of the light, motionless. I blinked, and it was gone. The next morning, the ground around the van was covered in prints. Not boots, bare feet. Dozens of them, pressed deep into the snow. Some small, some large, all leading from the lake toward my van, then back again. My stomach turned cold. I didn't film it. I didn't even take a photo. There's a kind of fear that doesn't want evidence, it just wants distance. I packed everything in silence. My plan was to head back to the main road before the fog got worse, but as I turned the key, the van wouldn't start. Battery was fine, gas full, it just wouldn't turn over. For hours I sat there trying everything, jumping the starter, checking the plugs. Nothing worked. The forest stayed quiet, like it was waiting. By noon, I decided to walk the 5 miles back toward the ranger station I'd passed earlier that day. The air was heavy with mist. I followed the trail, counting steps to stay calm, but after maybe 30 minutes, I noticed something strange, my own footprints. Not fresh ones, old ones, leading back toward the van. It didn't make sense. I'd walked in a straight line. I looked around. The trees were identical in every direction, their bark wet and black. The fog shifted, curling between them. And then I saw it again. Movement, low to the ground, quick, darting behind a stump. I called out, thinking maybe it was a person. No answer. Just that scraping sound again, somewhere behind me, moving in slow circles. I ran. I don't even remember deciding to. My body just moved. I didn't stop until the van came into view again, standing alone by the water, surrounded by fog like an island. I stumbled inside, slammed the door, and locked it. For hours I sat there, waiting. The knocks didn't come again. The silence stayed. And then, just as the last light faded from the sky, I heard the sound of the starter clicking once. Then again. Then the engine caught. I didn't question it. I drove. I don't even remember how I made it back to the main road, only that when I looked in the rearview mirror, the fog was gone, like it had never existed. When I got home, I didn't talk about what happened. Not for weeks. I told myself it was exhaustion, stress, that cold-induced hallucination. But every time I close my eyes, I still see those prints in the snow, circling the van. That trip taught me something I hadn't understood before. Preparation isn't about control. It's about respect. The unseen isn't always hostile, but it is always aware. And if you go far enough into the wilderness with your Volkswagen humming like a heartbeat through the trees, sooner or later, it will look back at you. After that trip, I told myself I was done with solo camping for a while. I cleaned out the van, fixed the starter, packed away my gear. But every night, lying in bed, I could still hear that sound. The measured knock on thin metal, like the forest had learned how to speak in my language. I kept trying to rationalize it. Stress, sleep deprivation, maybe even low oxygen in the high elevation. But there was something about the prints, bare feet in the snow, that I couldn't fit into any logic. Every explanation felt hollow, forced, like I was patching a hole in the hull while the water still seeped in. It's strange how fear doesn't fade. It mutates. It waits for you in quieter forms. By spring, I convinced myself to go back out again. Not to that same lake, but close. There's a small campground north of Medicine Lake. Nothing official, just a clearing people use when they don't want to pay fees. I'd been there before, years ago, when I first bought the Volkswagen. Back then, it felt like freedom. I wanted to see if I could reclaim that feeling. The drive out was beautiful. The roads were open, wildflowers lining the shoulders, the air warm and clean. The van ran smoother than it had in years. I played music loud, pretending I was fine. But somewhere deep inside, I knew this was more than a trip. It was a test. I arrived late afternoon. There was only one other camper, a rusted Ford Econoline parked at the far edge of the clearing. I waved, but no one waved back. The windows were dark and the doors closed. I parked about 50 yards away near a line of tall cedars that bordered the lake. The ground was dry and the water was still. It should have felt peaceful. But as I unpacked, I noticed something strange. The air smelled faintly of smoke. Not campfire smoke. Something older, like burned plastic or wiring. I walked around the clearing, scanning for anyone else. The forest was empty. No birds, no insects, no sound. Even the water looked motionless. I set up camp anyway, routine again, trying to keep my nerves in check. Sunset came fast. The lake turned black. My own reflection in the window looked distant, detached. I tried to cook, but the smell of the smoke seemed to thicken, almost like it was clinging to my clothes. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the van made me flinch. I kept thinking about the other camper, the one that hadn't moved, hadn't lit a fire, hadn't made a sound. Around midnight, I saw something. A faint glow through the fog. Not fire, not headlights. A soft, pulsing amber light coming from inside that Ford. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out. The air was cold and still. I started walking toward it, each step crunching in the dirt. The closer I got, the quieter it felt, until the sound of my own breathing was all that existed. When I reached the van, the light went out. Instantly, like someone had flipped a switch the moment I approached. I waited. Nothing. I called out. No answer. Something in me said to leave it alone. But curiosity is its own kind of trap. I took one more step and realized the door wasn't fully shut. It was hanging open just an inch. I nudged it with the flashlight. It swung wide with a low metallic groan. Inside, the air reeked of mildew and gasoline. A sleeping bag lay open on the floor, covered in frost. A few cans of food stacked by the bed, all unopened. But what froze me wasn't the emptiness, it was the smell of something burned. Not fresh, old, thick. There was a paper map pinned to the wall with a hunting knife, the same lake I was camped by, circled in red. Around it, someone had written in block letters, "The quiet is not empty." My throat went dry. I backed out slowly, closed the door, and walked back to my van. The moment I shut my own door, I locked it twice. The night pressed in heavy. I kept the flashlight on for hours, tracing shadows across the ceiling, waiting for the sun. When morning came, the other van was gone. Not just moved, gone. No tire tracks, no footprints, just flattened grass where it had been. I stood there for a long time, not sure what I was supposed to do. Call someone? Tell a ranger? I didn't even know how to explain it. Who do you call when something disappears without evidence? By noon, I was driving back toward the main road. I told myself I'd stop at a cafe, regroup, maybe talk to someone. But halfway down the trail, I saw something on the ground, half buried in dust. A license plate, bent, rusted, the numbers barely visible. It matched the plate from that Ford. I drove faster. The road was narrow, winding through dense woods that looked darker than before. My chest felt tight, like the forest was closing in. The Volkswagen rattled as if the earth beneath it was shifting. Then the smell hit me again. Smoke and metal. Stronger this time. I looked ahead, and there it was. The same Ford, parked in the middle of the trail, empty, no driver, no movement. The windshield was cracked like a spiderweb, the inside burned black. I stopped 50 feet away. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I didn't want to get out, but I couldn't drive past without looking. The air felt wrong, hot and cold at the same time. I stepped closer, slow, every sense screaming that I shouldn't. When I got near the back of the van, I saw something written in the soot on the rear window. Letters traced by a finger. Prepare yourself. The smell was unbearable now, heavy with rot. I turned and stumbled back to my Volkswagen. The door slammed shut with a sound that echoed through the trees. I started the engine. This time it roared to life instantly. As I pulled away, I caught one last glimpse in the rearview mirror. For a second, just one, I swear I saw someone sitting in the driver's seat of that burned-out van. A silhouette. Still. Watching. I drove until I hit the highway, then another hour beyond that. I didn't stop until I reached a rest area near Mount Shasta. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. That night I slept inside the van, surrounded by the dull glow of fluorescent parking lot lights. But even there, in the comfort of civilization, I could still hear it, the faint knocking sound somewhere deep within the frame of the van. 3 slow taps. When I woke in the morning, I found ash streaked across the windows. Inside, not outside. I sat there staring at it for a long time, trying to understand, trying to breathe. That's when I realized something fundamental had shifted. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was awareness. The wilderness isn't just trees and wind and distance. It's a kind of intelligence, old and patient. It watches those who enter without humility. And sometimes it reminds you that survival isn't about equipment. It's about reverence. I didn't go home right away. Something inside me wouldn't let me. I sat there at that rest stop for hours, staring at the streaks of ash on the inside of my van's windows, watching sunlight catch them in thin gray veins. Every time I wiped them away, they came back faintly, like a fingerprint the metal refused to forget. That night, I decided to drive farther south toward Lawson. I didn't have a plan, just the road and that gnawing sense that running might somehow make it stop. But the further I went, the stranger things began to feel. Somewhere past Bernie, I noticed the temperature drop. Sharp, fast, unnatural. My breath fogged the glass even with the heater on. The forest outside had gone perfectly still again. The only sound was the tires on gravel. Then even that started to fade, like the road itself was softening beneath me. I slowed the van, headlights cutting through mist. Then I saw something ahead, a shape standing in the middle of the road. For a second, I thought it was an elk. But as I got closer, the figure didn't move. It was a person, barefoot. I stopped about 20 feet away, engine idling. The figure stood perfectly still, arms at their sides. The fog coiled around them like smoke, hiding everything above the shoulders. I rolled the window down an inch and called out. No answer. My voice disappeared into the air like sound swallowed by snow. The figure stepped forward, one slow step, then another. Something primal took over. I slammed the van into reverse and backed up hard, gravel spitting behind the tires. But no matter how far I reversed, the headlights stayed locked on that same figure, as if the distance between us never changed. Then the engine died. Lights flickered, dashboard went dark. The silence pressed in, thick and suffocating. I don't remember what made me do it, but I got out. Maybe it was anger. Maybe I was tired of running from something I couldn't see clearly. The cold hit me like a wall, burning my lungs. I could barely see 10 feet ahead. The figure was gone. All I could hear was the wind, or what I thought was wind, moving through the trees in low, rhythmic bursts. Then came a smell I'll never forget: wet earth, old wood, and smoke. The fog shifted, and for a split second I saw something on the ground, bare footprints. A trail of them, circling my van again. I moved toward the driver's side door, but before I could reach it, something slammed against the metal from inside. 3 knocks. The exact same pattern as before. I stumbled backward. My mind was screaming to run, but my body was frozen. Another knock, louder this time, like it came from deep within the van's frame. And then the voice, faint, muffled, coming from inside the van. My name. I felt every hair on my arms stand straight up. I don't even remember unlocking the door, but I did. I opened it, expecting I don't know what. The van was empty. The lights flickered once, the heater fan sputtered, and then everything came back to life like nothing had happened. I got in and drove. No looking back. The road twisted and climbed, and by the time I saw the first sign of a highway exit, I was shaking so badly I could barely keep the wheel steady. I didn't stop until I reached an open campground off Highway 44. It was empty. No other vehicles, no lights, just flat ground and open sky. I parked under a stand of pines and turned the engine off. The world went silent again, but this silence felt different. Not hostile this time, just tired. Heavy, but not cruel. I sat there for a long time, staring out at the trees. Somewhere between exhaustion and fear, I started to understand something I hadn't before. The forest, the road, the fog, it wasn't chasing me. It was showing me, forcing me to confront the way I'd been living. Always preparing, always controlling, always convincing myself that safety was the same as awareness. But you can't prepare for everything. You can't shield yourself from the unknown. Sometimes you have to listen. I got out and stood in the dark. The air was cold, but the stars were clearer than I'd ever seen them. Millions of them scattered like salt over black glass. I closed my eyes, let the sound of the forest fill the space between my heartbeat. For the first time in months, I didn't feel hunted. I felt witnessed. It's strange how peace can arrive wrapped in fear. how something can terrify you into clarity. When dawn came, I made coffee on the little propane stove and watched the steam rise into the pale gold light. Every breath of that morning felt earned. I walked down toward the tree line, and there, half buried under pine needles, I found something metallic glinting in the dirt. It was a Volkswagen emblem, the same shape as mine, old, worn, the edges blackened like it had been through fire. I held it for a while, unsure what to feel. Maybe it was from another camper, maybe from something older. But the way it caught the light made it look almost alive, pulsing faintly with reflected sun. I didn't take it with me. I left it there. Some things belong to the wilderness. When I finally drove home, the van felt different, quieter, like something inside it had been acknowledged. I cleaned it top to bottom that afternoon, wiped the windows, replaced the floor mats, even patched the scratches in the paint. But when I finished, I noticed something etched faintly into the metal near the rear panel. Letters so shallow you could only see them at a certain angle. Stay awake. Maybe I did it myself. Maybe I'd missed it before. But the words stuck with me, because that's what all of this came down to. Preparation isn't about predicting the storm. It's about staying awake through it, about recognizing that the unknown isn't your enemy. It's the mirror that shows you what you've ignored. Out there in the wild, surrounded by fog and silence and things we'll never fully name, you start to understand what survival really means. It's not just about food, water, or fire. It's about perception, respect, awareness. There's something sacred about solitude when you stop trying to control it. The forest has its own rhythm, and when you finally let yourself hear it, not through microphones or speakers, but through stillness, it teaches you, sometimes brutally, sometimes beautifully. I don't go camping to escape anymore. I go to listen. And every time I step into that van, turn the key, and feel the old engine rumble to life, I remind myself that the world outside the window isn't separate from me. It's reflecting me, my fears, my doubts, my noise. If you're planning your next trip, if you're packing your Volkswagen and mapping out every stop, every precaution, remember this. The wilderness doesn't want your fear. It wants your attention. Don't just prepare your RV for the road. Prepare yourself for the silence. Because in that silence, everything speaks. The trees, the wind, the fog. And if you listen closely enough, you might realize that the unseen you've been running from was never out there. It was always inside, waiting for you to open the door. I don't know when I first realized the desert was trying to take me back, but I think the truth was always there, waiting beneath the silence. My name is Elias Ward, and I'm 36 years old. I've spent most of my adult life wandering the back roads of the American Southwest in an RV that rattles like old bones. People ask me why I never settled down. I always tell them it's the freedom, the night skies, the wild spirit of the West. I never tell them the real reason. The desert had taken someone from me once, and I've been trying to understand how ever since. I didn't choose the desert, it chose me. That's not poetic, it's a warning. I'd been camping alone for years, making videos about remote RV sites and forgotten towns, the ones that don't show up on maps anymore. Viewers love the thrill of it. Creepy, abandoned motels, silent mining camps, gas stations with windows boarded up and dust-blasted signs pointing nowhere. They say it's hauntingly beautiful. But beauty is only haunting if you've never been haunted. There are countless ghost towns scattered across the Mojave, the Sonoran, the Great Basin, places stripped clean by the sun. Some still stand like they're waiting for their people to come home. Others sink into the sand as if the earth wants to swallow all evidence that life ever existed there. I'd been warned to avoid a place called Ridgewell. Maybe you've heard whispers of it, a mining town that boomed and died fast in the 1950s. The kind of place where the ground was rich, but the souls weren't. People left overnight, leaving their dishes on the table, beds half made, clothes still on the lines behind their houses. The stories said the miners dug too deep, that something old was down there, buried where it liked to stay. Locals don't even talk about it now. And if you ask for directions, they'll say the town burned down, but they'll never say who lit the match. I should have listened. But grief makes you stubborn. And when you spend too much time alone, you start listening to the wrong voices in your head, the ones that dare you. A year ago, my younger brother Evan disappeared near a desert highway. He'd been camping in a ghost town. I didn't know where. And by the time anyone realized he was missing, there was no trace left except his empty camper and a torn page from his journal. 4 words written in his messy handwriting: "The town remembers me." He had no connection to any town. No past trauma, no reason to write something so cryptic. Unless it was connected to me. I'm the one who left the desert behind. I'm the one who never wanted to go back. But the desert never forgot. 6 months after his disappearance, I made a promise to my parents, to myself, that if I ever found anything, any clue, any direction that whispered Evan's name, I would follow it. That's how I ended up heading south on Highway 95 with a dry throat and a steering wheel trembling beneath my grip. A storm was building that day. One of those rare desert storms where the sky turns a bruised violet and thunder crawls low like something angry trying to escape the clouds. I thought maybe it was a sign telling me to turn around, but I'd already driven hundreds of miles, and somewhere out there, past the abandoned gas stations and sunburned billboards, Ridgewell waited. The road to Ridgewell wasn't on my GPS. It started as a sandy spur near a ravine, a battered sign lying face down beside it. I pulled over, killed the engine, and stepped out. The heat slapped me like a punishment, the air tasting metallic, like old pennies held too long in your mouth. The storm clouds overhead flashed white, illuminating jagged silhouettes of hills that looked like teeth rising from the earth. I walked around the fallen sign and wiped away the dirt. The paint was faded, letters chipped, but I could still make them out. Ridgewell, 15 miles. I hesitated. Every rational part of me screamed, "Don't do this." But the thought of Evan out there, alone or worse, tightened something inside my chest. So I climbed back into the RV, put it in drive, and let curiosity do what fear couldn't, push me forward. The town appeared like a mirage, washed in sunset's red, buildings leaning, windows shattered, a rusted water tower creaking in the wind like a dying animal. I parked near what used to be the main street, a stretch of cracked pavement swallowed in drifting sand. The quiet was heavy and aware, like the town had eyes. I stepped out, boots sinking into fine dust. My breath sounded too loud in my ears. The air smelled like dry wood and something faintly sweet, rotting flowers maybe, or perfume left open too long. I clicked my flashlight on, even though there was still enough daylight to see. That's when I noticed the signs of recent life. Footprints, not boots, bare feet. Small, like a child's, and there were dozens of them, circling the abandoned houses, weaving through doorways, overlapping until it looked like they'd been running, chasing something, or someone. My gut twisted. I forced myself to focus on filming, describing the buildings into the camera to keep myself calm. Old saloon, general store, a row of collapsed miner shacks, and then my flashlight caught something half buried near a dried-out well, a piece of fabric flapping weakly in the wind. I walked closer. My pulse hammered harder with each step. It was a scrap of gray canvas, just like the jacket Evan always wore. Not proof, not yet, but close enough to burn hope through my veins like wildfire. The sun disappeared fast, swallowed by storm clouds that rolled overhead like a warning. The sky cracked with thunder, and wind rushed through the town so suddenly that every door still on its hinges slammed open at once, a shotgun blast of wood and echoes. I almost ran back to the RV. Almost. But then I heard it. Faint but unmistakable. A voice. Calling my name. Elias. Not shouted. Whispered. Like someone standing right behind me, I spun around. Nothing. Just dust swirling in the wind. The storm broke. Rain hammered the roofs, turning dust into mud within seconds. Lightning illuminated the sky, revealing every decaying building like a flash photograph of a corpse. I sprinted back to the RV, slammed the door behind me, heart racing, breath shaking. Inside, everything looked the same, except for one thing. On the table by the kitchenette, a single Polaroid photo. My photo. It was me, standing in this town, but the picture was old, at least 20 years. The version of me in the photo was maybe 15 or 16, and I was smiling. I don't remember ever being here. Not as a kid. Not ever. Yet there I was, a ghost of myself, staring into a camera I had never seen, and written underneath in black marker were two chilling words: "Welcome back." My stomach dropped like the floor had opened beneath me. My vision blurred at the edges, a mix of fear and confusion trying to tear me apart from the inside. I'd spent years avoiding these exact roads, pretending the desert was nothing more than heat and sand. But the town hadn't forgotten me. It had been waiting. And now, I understood something I never wanted to admit. I knew Ridgewell. Ridgewell knew me. And it wanted something. I stood frozen, staring at that Polaroid like it might move if I blinked. The rain hammered the roof of the RV, each drop sounding like a knuckle tapping insistently. I lifted the picture with trembling fingers. The ink on the words wasn't smudged, not faded, fresh. Someone or something had placed it there while I was outside, inside the RV, in my safe place. That realization hit me harder than the storm outside. Whatever inhabited this town could step into my home, rifle through my life, and choose exactly the right memory to break me. I tried to steady my breathing, think rationally, check the door. Locked, windows shut tight, no signs of forced entry, no footprints on the floor, like whoever left the photo never needed to open anything at all. I dropped into the driver's seat and turned the ignition. Nothing. No engine rumble. No clicking. Just silence. I tried again, slower this time, as if patience might persuade a dead battery to resurrect itself. Still nothing but an empty key turn. A dizzy wave of fear washed through me. I grabbed the satellite radio mic and tried to call for help, but the radio only hissed with dead static. Storm interference? Or something else? I kept my hands on the steering wheel longer than I should have, staring out the rain-streaked windshield into the blackness beyond the headlights. Every instinct screamed, "Get out of Ridgewell, now." But instincts meant nothing here. I was trapped. A sharp thump hit the side of the RV. I jerked in my seat, head snapping toward the sound. Then another thump, against the back door. My heart pounded so violently it hurt. I stood slowly, carefully, like prey trying not to draw attention. The storm continued raging outside. Wind howled through broken buildings, creating ghostly harmonies that rose and fell like distant voices. But these knocks, these were close, purposeful. Someone, or several someones, outside in the pouring rain, circling my RV. I killed the lights and crouched below the windows, inching toward the back door. Each breath felt ear-splitting in the stillness. I pressed my ear to the cold metal. Silence. Just as I started to pull away, a child's giggle crackled through the storm. High-pitched. Fragile. Right on the other side of the door, I stumbled back, heart slamming into my ribs. I squeezed my eyes shut for a second, just one, begging for logic to return. But logic doesn't exist in forgotten places, especially ones that remember you. Against every survival instinct I had, I cracked one of the back curtains open just enough to peer outside. Lightning flashed. For half a second, I saw tiny silhouettes standing in a circle around the RV. Children, dozens of them. Bare feet, clothes dark with rain, heads tilted upward, but their faces hidden in shadow. Unmoving. Silent again, like the laugh had been a trick. The light died. Darkness swallowed everything. I fell away from the window, scrambling backward until I hit the sink. My breath came out in shallow bursts, lungs barely working. I needed a weapon. Anything. I grabbed a heavy wrench from a toolbox beneath the bed, gripping it like a lifeline. I tried the ignition once more. Still dead. The storm outside was thinning, the thunder rolling farther away like something retreating, for now. The rain eased into uneven drips hitting the metal roof. But the quiet that followed was worse. Unsettling. Expectant. Minutes dragged by like hours. I forced myself to look out again. The children were gone. No prints in the mud. No sign of movement. As if they dissolved back into the darkness that birthed them. I stayed awake for what felt like half the night, wrench in hand, back against the wall, waiting for the next knock. But exhaustion eventually smothered fear, and my eyes drifted shut against my will. When I woke, the light outside was pale, early, gray morning light. My heart was still pounding from dreams I couldn't remember fully. I stumbled to my feet and rubbed the condensation off the nearest window. No children, just the town. Poorly standing structures. A sky full of dusty clouds. I turned the ignition key, and the RV roared to life, like nothing had ever gone wrong. A chill crept up my spine. This place was playing with me. I wanted to leave. Now. But before I could shift into drive, I noticed something through the windshield that made me stop cold. Another Polaroid. This one was pinned to the cracked windshield with a single rusty nail. I stepped outside slowly, scanning every direction. The town was dead quiet. Only the faded sign of the general store creaked back and forth in a soft morning breeze. I pulled the photo down and stared in disbelief. It was Evan. Same jacket, same scruffy beard, standing right here in Ridgewell, but his face, something about the way he stared into the camera made my stomach twist. His eyes weren't looking at the person taking the picture. They were looking past them, over their shoulder, at something coming, and written below his image, "He never left." I nearly dropped the photo. Tears stung my eyes, fear and hope warring for control. For the first time since Evan vanished, I felt like I wasn't chasing ghosts, like I was walking directly into the same darkness that swallowed him. Maybe I could bring him home, or maybe Ridgewell meant to keep us both. I shoved the picture into my jacket and forced myself to breathe, steady and slow. Running without answers felt worse than staying without comfort. I grabbed my flashlight, tightened my grip on the wrench, and stepped into the street. The desert morning cast long shadows that slithered between buildings like living things. Sand crunched beneath my boots. Every direction looked the same, skeletal houses and storefronts blankly staring back at me. But one building stood apart. A 2-story miner's dorm at the end of the street. The windows were intact, curtains still hanging like someone might return any minute. There were footprints in the sand leading toward it. Boot prints. No children, no bare feet. Adult. Possibly Evan. Possibly not. Either way, they were fresh. My heart thudded rhythmically, each beat a warning signal. But regret has a way of demanding bravery you don't actually feel. So I followed the prints. The dorm's door creaked as I pushed it. Inside, the dust had barely settled over what once was. Metal bunks lined the walls. Lockers left open, papers scattered across the floor like a windstorm of forgotten messages. The air felt colder here, heavy, like the oxygen didn't circulate properly. I flicked my flashlight around the room. That's when I saw it. A message scrawled across the far wall in charcoal black strokes, tall and jagged. "Don't let them see you remember." My blood ran cold. Remember what? Every forgotten childhood trip? Every sunset I didn't know I'd seen here? Every secret the desert buried for me? A floorboard creaked directly above my head. Someone was upstairs. I raised the wrench, breathing shallow. Each step up the narrow staircase felt like choosing danger on purpose. The wood groaned under my weight. I reached the top and found a long hallway lined with bedrooms, doors left slightly ajar as if they expected me. The last door on the left slammed shut on its own. Hard. The sound echoed through the dorm like a gunshot. I stared at that closed door while my hand shook uncontrollably. I could turn back, run, drive until the desert disappeared behind me, pretend none of this ever happened. But then I imagined Evan, trapped, abandoned, hoping someone would dare to keep going. So I did. I stepped forward, each footfall louder than the last until I reached that final door, my palm pressed against worn wood, still vibrating from the slam. I tightened my grip on the wrench and pushed. A breath of cold air hit me like ice water. At first, darkness. Then my flashlight revealed the room, books scattered across the floor, old mining helmets piled in a corner, and on a small metal table beside the window, a third Polaroid. This one face down, my throat closed. I forced myself to pick it up. I turned it over. The image nearly tore the scream from my throat. It was me, sleeping, inside my RV, taken sometime last night, and the written message seared itself into my mind. You can't leave again. My knees weakened. The wrench slipped from my hand and clattered loudly on the metal floor. That's when footsteps echoed behind me in the hall. Slow, deliberate, and many. Not children now. Adults, minors, returning from a shift long after death. The building groaned as those steps drew closer and closer. I backed away until I hit the wall, gripping the Polaroid like a lifeline. Whatever was coming, it wanted me to remember. It needed me here. And the worst part, somewhere deep inside, I did remember. The footsteps grew heavier, shaking the old floorboards like the dorm itself was breathing under the weight of those unseen miners. Panic lightning bolted through my nerves. I grabbed the wrench just as the first shadow stretched across the hallway, long and distorted, like a figure whose limbs were bending wrong. I sprinted back toward the staircase, nearly slipping on loose papers as lanterns or light sources I couldn't see flickered to life down the hall. A sickly yellow glow creeping behind me, one door at a time in a perfect sequence, like a warning or a countdown. My boots pounded the steps. I hit the bottom and didn't look back. The air in the dorm warped behind me, walls groaning, something scraping like nails down the inside of the plaster. I bolted outside into the silent daylight, lungs clawing for air as I doubled over in the dust. The street was empty again. No children, no minors, no signs I'd ever been chased. But the dorm windows now reflected something new. Faint human shapes standing just behind the curtains, watching. I stumbled backward, unable to tear my eyes away. Then a sudden clang echoed from behind me, the water tower. My heart lurched. The ladder on its side rattled violently, even though not a breeze stirred. And then it stopped, dead still, like it had only moved to grab my attention. I turned in a tight circle, hyper-aware of every doorway, every shadow. If fear could devour a person, it was chewing me slowly, savoring the taste. I kept moving, not toward any place in particular, but away from the dorm, away from those eyes behind the glass. The general store was closest. The windows were dusty but unbroken, faded Pepsi stickers peeling away from the glass. The door hung crooked on one hinge, like it had been pulled too hard by someone desperate, or dragged by someone who no longer remembered how doors worked. I pushed it open. A tiny bell above the frame jangled once, high-pitched and lonely, then fell silent. Inside smelled like rust and long-expired sweetness. Dust-coated canned goods lined neatly on shelves as if whoever stocked them expected customers to return any minute. A cash register sat open, coins scattered like they'd been dropped in a panic. Behind the counter, a row of Polaroids hung from twine, dozens of them, clipped by rusty clothespins. At first, I thought they were old store photos. But as I stepped closer, dread tightened its grip around my spine. They were pictures of people, campers, travelers, RVers like me. Each one posed somewhere in Ridgewell, smiling, relaxed, alive. Each one with a date written below, but no year, just a month and day, and every date matched a day someone had gone missing in the desert. I knew because I recognized a few faces, viral true crime cases that had circulated online, stories unsolved. Ridgewell kept souvenirs. I forced myself not to look for Evan among them, but curiosity is a cruel instinct. I scanned the rows once, then twice. My stomach dropped. There he was, second row, fifth photo. Evan, smiling beneath that same water tower outside. His date, August 17th, no year listed. Below the date, a message, still here. Not past tense, present. A gasp escaped me, loud in the vacant store. I clutched the photo, fingers leaving smudges on its glossy surface. My hands shook so badly the picture nearly fluttered from my grip. A shuffling sound came from the back room, slow, dragging. I shoved the photo into my pocket and ducked behind a shelf, crouching low. The shuffling grew louder, closer. I held my breath. The door to the back room creaked open. A figure stepped out. Tall, gaunt, with a miner's helmet sitting crooked on their skull. But the helmet's light was dead. No beam. No glow. Just hollow darkness inside the helmet's visor, where a face should be. The figure stood still for a moment, listening. I felt exposed. One tiny sound and I'd be seen. Then another figure emerged behind it, and another. A whole procession of long-lost miners creeping like sleepwalkers through aisles of dusty food. Their boots dragged through sand that had no right being indoors. Their heads moved in unison, jerking slightly, searching for breath, for memory, for me. I stayed perfectly silent, praying the pounding of my heart wasn't audible. Finally, they moved on, exits groaning open as the group drifted back into the daylight. I waited and waited, counting to 60 twice before I dared straighten up. That's when I saw it, behind the counter. A leather-bound notebook. Evan's journal. I recognized the tattered cover instantly. A wash of grief and adrenaline surged through me as I grabbed it and flipped through pages filled with notes, some coherent, others frantic. One page had a map, the streets of Ridgewell drawn in pencil, a large X marked beneath the water tower. A scribbled message beside it read, "Not buried, waiting." My gut clenched. As I flipped another page, a Polaroid slipped out and fluttered to the floor. I picked it up. My breath caught in my throat. It was a picture of me and Evan, younger, teenagers, standing in front of a large metal door in the desert. A sign above us read, "Ridgewell Mines, keep out throughout." I dropped the photo. Memories surged like an earthquake, buried deep but never gone. We had been here, years ago. Dad brought us hunting, or so he said, but we never left the RV site. He kept us inside as he and a group of men disappeared into the mines for hours. We heard screams echoing from below the earth. When Dad returned, his hands were shaking so bad he couldn't drive straight. We left in silence before sunrise, and he made us swear, "You were never here. You never saw Ridgewell." And we listened, until Evan didn't. The journal shook in my hands as truth sank its teeth deep. My brother came back to finish what Dad started, and Ridgewell refused to let him leave. The bell above the door jingled lightly, not from a breeze, from someone entering. I turned toward the storefront, expecting dust to fall from the ceiling as miners pushed their way back in. But instead, a child stood in the center aisle. A girl, maybe 6, bare feet blackened with sand, a sun-faded dress that looked handmade. She tilted her head at me, the same way the kids around my RV had. Her eyes were wrong, too dark, too deep, like looking into a well that never ended. I tightened my grip on the wrench. She blinked slowly, then spoke in a dry whisper that scraped the air like broken glass. "You shouldn't have remembered." Every muscle in my body locked. She took one delicate step backward, never breaking eye contact. Then she turned and walked outside, disappearing into the blinding daylight. And she left the door wide open for whatever waited to follow. I shoved Evan's journal into my backpack and ran, out of the store, past sun-bleached walls and shattered windows, following the map like it was the only thread tying me to hope. The water tower loomed above me, rust flaking, structure swaying under its own decades-old corrosion. Beneath it, an iron hatch lay half buried in sand just where the map's X marked it. Not buried. Waiting. With shaking hands, I brushed away dirt until I found a steel handle. I pulled. The hatch groaned open, heavy, reluctant, revealing a staircase plunging underground. Cold air exhaled from below, air that did not belong to any place touched by sunlight. Fear clawed at me, primal and desperate, begging me not to go down those stairs. But I could hear it now, faint but real. A voice, calling my name. Elias, not memory, not hallucination. Evan. I gripped the wrench like the last piece of courage I had and climbed down into the dark. The stairway swallowed the daylight behind me as I descended, step by slow step, into a shaft of cold that felt older than the dust resting on these walls. The metal beneath my boots groaned, protesting my weight like it resented the living still daring to tread here. My flashlight beam jittered, partly from my shaking hands, partly because the air itself seemed to ripple, warping the light. The further I went, the louder the voice became. Elias, not scared, not urgent, just calling. Patient, familiar. The staircase ended abruptly on solid rock. The narrow tunnel ahead stretched into blackness, the stone walls scored with pickaxe marks, some shallow and desperate, others deep as if hacked in a frenzy. Rusted rails lined the ground, leading an old mine cart into shadow. I shined my light down the tunnel. Dust swirled, forming shapes that almost resembled hands reaching upward, then dispersing like they had never been there. The air tasted metallic, tinged with the bitter echo of old machinery and something else. something rotten, but long dead. I stepped forward, and the moment my boot hit dirt, the hatch slammed shut above. The clang rang down the shaft like the sound of a coffin lid sealing. My breath hitched. Panic rushed up my throat like fire. I spun back toward the stairs, but it was pointless. There was no handle on this side, no way to pry it open. The desert kept its exits one way only. I forced myself to keep breathing. In, out, slow, deliberate. My only choice now was forward, toward the calling voice, or whatever was mimicking it. The tunnel forked ahead. One direction led to deeper darkness. The other glowed faintly, as though a light flickered just beyond the bend. The whisper came from that way. I followed. The passage opened into a large chamber, short beams holding up rock that groaned under its own weight, as if the earth resented being held back. Old mining equipment lay on its side, crushed beneath collapsed stone. But what drew my eyes were the carvings, primitive symbols etched everywhere. Walls, support beams, even the ceiling, rings within rings, sharp angles spiraling inward. Eyes without pupils. Not art, not language, warnings. My flashlight quivered across them, and shadows bowed like they feared being caught staring too long. At the center of the chamber, I found another Polaroid, placed carefully atop a rusted barrel. I knew before picking it up that it would be for me. And it was. But not the version I knew. His eyes were wide, terror locked inside them, his mouth twisted mid-scream. Behind him, a dark mass loomed, vague, shapeless, as if the camera itself couldn't capture what was truly there. Below it, a message. We woke it. My knees softened. The chamber suddenly felt too small, too tight. The walls seemed to pulse. A low rumble traveled through the rock beneath my feet. My flashlight flashed once, twice, then steadied, but the beam dimmed, shrinking the world around me. I shoved the photo into my pocket and pressed deeper into the mine, following the faint sound of dripping, water. Impossible. This place was bone dry, but the sound continued, steady, deliberate, each drip echoing far too loud in the silence. I turned a corner and saw it, a pool of dark liquid collecting under fractured rock. Not water. Thicker, black, reflecting light with a sickly sheen like oil or blood drained of color. A miner's helmet lay nearby, its strap snapped violently. The helmet suddenly jerked, dragged an inch toward the pool like something beneath had hooked its teeth into it. I stumbled back, wrench raised defensively. Silence. Then a slurp. The helmet vanished into the black. My pulse spiked. I backed away slowly, legs trembling with each retreating step. My heel struck something. I turned. A figure stood inches behind me. I swung blindly with the wrench, a startled yell ripping from my throat. Metal connected with something solid. The figure staggered back with a pained grunt. I froze, recognizing that sound even before my flashlight found his face. Evan. Alive. Older than in the photos. Gaunt. Pale. Eyes ringed with sleepless terror. He stared at me like I was a ghost. Elias? His voice cracked painfully. I reached for him, tears burning hot. Evan, what happened to you? We need to leave. Now. He grabbed my arm before I could pull him away. No, you don't understand. His breath came in sharp bursts as though every second of being conscious hurt. It knows we're together again. We shouldn't have remembered this place. We shouldn't... A deep groan rolled through the chamber like the earth itself growled. Evan's grip tightened. It's coming. I tried to drag him toward the tunnel, but he yanked me the opposite way. We can't go back. It's awake. It'll close every way out until we're part of this place. My chest constricted, not just with fear, but with creeping understanding, not buried, waiting. This wasn't just a mine, it was a nest. Something had slept here. Something the miners disturbed, and when they vanished, Ridgewell vanished too, erased to keep the secret buried, until kids like us returned. We ran. Evan guided me through twisting corridors, down ladders slick with dust and time, through chambers carved jagged by frantic excavation. Each step brought us deeper and deeper into the earth's throat. Behind us, rocks cracked, metal wailed. The mine shifted like a living creature trying to close its jaws. We reached a cavern so massive my flashlight beam couldn't touch the far walls. The ceiling arched into shadow, disappearing into infinite dark. Strange bones, longer than any animal I knew, jutted from the ground like broken ribs. Evan stopped abruptly, nearly collapsing against a boulder. "This is where it started," he whispered. "This is where Dad and the others tore open the earth. They thought it was gold, but it was something else." A distant scraping sounded from the tunnels behind us, something enormous dragging itself forward. Evan grabbed my shoulders. His fingers shook violently. It feeds on memory, on recognition. Once you remember Ridgewell, you belong to it. You don't leave. Not really. The truth landed heavy in my gut. Dad's terror, Evan's disappearance, the Polaroids, this whispering tomb beneath the sand, the children, the miners, all puppets of a force too old to comprehend. Everything Ridgewell had kept were offerings. A windless breeze swept through the cavern, cold, unnatural, smelling of earth long sealed away. My flashlight flickered again. Shapes slithered along the ceiling, eyes hundreds blinking awake. Evan's nails dug into my jacket. "We can still outrun it," he said, voice splintering at the seams. "There's one way out, one the miners never sealed, but we have to go, now." Before we moved, before I could find any semblance of hope, a voice filled the cavern, deep, rumbling, ancient. "Elias, welcome home," not spoken aloud, spoken inside my skull. The cavern screamed with shifting rock. Debris exploded from walls as something massive forced itself free. Evan shoved me toward a narrow passageway. "Run," I grabbed his arm to pull him with me, but a skeletal hand, sharp as rebar, lashed from the dark and wrapped around his leg. Evan screamed as he was yanked to the ground. I lunged, grabbed him by both arms, by heels digging into the dirt. My shoulder nearly tore from its socket as something dragged him back. "Don't let go," he cried, voice raw with terror. Every instinct told me to hold tighter, but the earth cracked beneath us. A chasm opened, splitting the cavern floor, and Evan slipped from my grasp like the desert always meant to have him. He disappeared with a sound I'll never forget, a final scream swallowed by the depths. Then silence, devouring silence. I stumbled backward, numb and broken, as the ground sealed itself shut. The mine had taken him, again, but this time, it wasn't finished. I don't remember screaming, but my throat burned as if I had. My body shook uncontrollably, adrenaline trying to force my limbs to move while grief pinned me to the cavern floor. Evan's voice still echoed inside my skull, that terrified, broken spike, "Don't let go," looping like punishment. I staggered to my feet, flashlight clutched like a weapon even though it barely cut through the dark now. I expected the cavern to roar with triumph, to shake apart as that thing dragged itself into the open. But instead, this pressed on my ears thick and steady, like the mine was holding its breath, savoring the moment. The voice returned, deeper this time. Closer. "You came back to finish what you started." The words weren't sound, they were weight. Crushing. They rattled through my ribs like I was hollow. I forced myself to step backward toward the narrow passage Evan pointed out. It looked impossibly tight, barely wide enough for my shoulders. A jagged crack in the cavern wall that might as well have been a throat ready to swallow me whole. Behind me, the darkness shifted. Stone groaned. Something massive scraped, like bones grinding against rock. I didn't look. Looking meant acknowledging the shape. The shape meant memory. And memory was what fed this cursed place. All my life, I tried to forget Ridgewell, because some part of me already knew remembering would call it back. I squeezed into the passage, scraping my arms raw against the sharp stone. My lungs expanded shallowly, not enough room to breathe right. My flashlight flickered again, light spasming across mineral veins embedded in the walls, veins that pulsed like they carried blood. The voice oozed into the passage behind me. "You were born of this place. You never should have left." I crawled faster, pebbles cutting through my palms. Panic rose like acid, choking, blinding. All I heard was my heartbeat hammering inside a skull too small to contain terror. A blast of warm air surged through the passage like a giant exhaled. The space behind me tightened, compressing. The walls shifted inward, stone groaning as if the earth wanted to crush me into the memory I had awakened. "No, no, no," I gasped, pushing harder. My knees buckled forward. The flashlight slipped and clanged ahead of me, spinning wildly. Projection bouncing across the ceiling and revealing markings carved into stone. Claw marks. Deep ones. Like someone, or something, had tried to scramble their way out the same route. Had they made it? Or had the cave sealed around them like a tomb? The question sliced through me like a blade, a reminder that escape wasn't guaranteed. The passage angled upward abruptly, forcing me into a crouching climb. Each breath tasted like rust. Dust coated my throat. My ears popped from pressure shifts as the air grew warmer, thicker, alive. A shrill scrape echoed behind me. I risked one glance over my shoulder. The darkness moved. A bulging shape pressed into the tunnel. Too large, too wrong. It didn't crawl. It expanded, like a living shadow pushing its way through the stone, bones cracking and reforming as it came. Eyes glinted in the dark. Not reflective, but self-lit, pale and hungry. I lunged upward, scraping away skin. The opening ahead widened, a slanted tunnel supported by rotting planks and rust-choked cables. Something collapsed behind me, dust billowing past my face. The ground trembled, the walls moaned louder. It was forcing itself through, and failing. The stone wasn't meant to hold its shape. That was my only blessing. I burst into a larger tunnel, old mining lights dangling from cables overhead. I hammered the power switch on the wall out of instinct. To my shock, they flickered on, one by one, illuminating the passage, as if the mine itself wanted me to see where I was going, or wanted to see me run. The tunnel stretched endlessly forward, rails disappearing beneath sand and broken rock. I sprinted, boots pounding so hard the rails vibrated underfoot. Behind me, the passage split open with a thunderous crack. Debris rained down, and a limb, long, spined, jointed wrong, exploded into view, clawing at the floor. I ran faster, breath tearing from my chest, muscles screaming. Lights overhead flickered violently as the entire mine rumbled, a beast waking, lungs filling with rage. The rails curved, leading into another chamber lined with abandoned machinery. A minecart rested crooked on the tracks, its wheels rusted solid. But the most horrifying sight was the far wall. Bodies. Dozens of them. Some wearing faded mining gear. Others in modern clothing. Hikers, RV travelers, and children. Their mouths hung open, eyes wide like they died seeing something no living brain could withstand. Their skin had dried into cracked husks, preserved by the desert's cruel air, posture frozen mid-struggle. I stumbled back, gagging. Not bodies. Warnings. Sacrifices. Souls who remembered too much. "Evan," I whispered, voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." A low whisper drifted through the chamber, not the ancient voice. Familiar. Close, Elias. I turned violently, wrench raised, expecting a monster, but there he was. Evan. Not whole, not alive, his skin gray, eyes hollow glass, the same torn jacket. He stepped toward me, gait uneven, like his bones were remembering how to fit. "You can stay," he whispered, tone pleading. "No more running, no more fear." His hand reached for mine. I shook my head, tears breaking free. "You're not real. I'm what you left behind," he said softly. "You don't have to leave again," he saw we can finally stay home. The walls tremored like they agreed. The monster's voice boomed. "Yes, come home." Evan smiled. A smile that did not belong to the brother I loved. I took one step back, then another, until the minecart pressed against my legs. He kept walking, still smiling. "You already belong to it." I processed one realization. If I stayed frozen, I'd die frozen. I shoved the minecart hard, wheels shrieking, then leapt inside. The sudden weight broke the rust's grip. The cart lurched forward down the rails. Evan lunged, fingers brushing my sleeve, but I rolled deeper and his grip slipped. Then he was gone. The cart rocketed forward, gaining speed as the tracks descended. Wind roared in my ears. The tunnel ahead blurred into streaks of rock and shadow. The rails rattled so violently it felt like they'd tear loose from the earth. Behind me, the cavern shook as that thing, my pursuer, tore its way free. A screeching wail echoed through the mine. Lights burst overhead like fireworks of sparks and glass. The ground tilted sharply, rails transforming into a steep downward plunge. The cart hurtled into the abyss. I couldn't scream. Breath didn't exist, only speed ripping my body downward, gravity transforming fear into pure momentum. Then, blinding daylight exploded ahead. The tunnel shot straight out the side of a cliff. The cart flew. For a heartbeat, the entire world paused, suspended in silence. Then the fall. I crashed onto the desert floor so hard stars burst behind my eyelids, sand tearing into my skin. The minecart smashed into scrap metal against the hillside. I groaned, rolling onto my back. Above me, the ridge towered. The mine entrance glared like a mouth, and the desert sky stretched endless and blue. I was out. I was free. Except Ridgewell surrounded me, and the only thing more dangerous than entering a haunted desert town is trying to leave one. The world tilted around me, heat radiating upward from the desert floor like I'd landed on a giant sun-baked skillet. Every breath tasted like scorched air, gritty and metallic. My head throbbed, vision pulsing at the edges with black stars. But the sheer relief of daylight, of open sky, kept me conscious. I dragged myself upright, my knees buckling beneath my weight. Blood dripped down my forearm where rock had gouged into the skin on the way down. The mine's shadow stretched long behind me, too long, like darkness trying to reclaim what accidentally slipped through its fingers. The air shimmered, and for a moment I thought I saw movement in the black void of the mine opening. A shape crouched low, waiting. I forced myself to look away, to move. The RV was somewhere beyond the ridge. The road was miles away. But if I kept my bearings, if I trusted the sun, I could make it back. I could make this town nothing more than a memory again. But memories are what Ridgewell eats. I stumbled forward through sagebrush, thorns ripping fabric and skin. Every step was agony, but still quieter than the roar thudding behind me, the vibration of earth, the anger of a hunger denied. The desert wind kicked up, filling the air with dust devils and swirling grit. The silence, once peaceful, now felt predatory. It stalked me, followed me, pressed against the back of my neck. Then, a voice, small, fragile. Elias, I froze. That name, that beautiful shattered word should have brought me comfort. Instead, it hollowed me out. Mirages flickered in the heat haze. One moment, nothing. The next, Evan stood there. Not the corpse puppet I saw below, not the terrified boy from the mine. The version of him I remembered most, 12 years old, sunburnt nose, wearing that oversized teal hoodie and holding the desert compass he always carried. The compass I left behind when I ran. He stepped toward me, hair fluttering in the wind. You promised you'd come back for me. My throat tightened. I never stopped regretting it. He reached out his hand. Then stay. We don't have to hurt anymore. My heart twisted, pulled toward him by 20 years of guilt, sharpened into a single point. But something in his eyes was wrong. Too focused. Too aware. Like a predator pretending to be a child. You're not him, I whispered. Of course I am, he said. You kept me alive. In here. He tapped his chest, then his smile split wider, stretching beyond human expression. And now I'll keep you, Elias. The desert around him shifted like a mirage collapsing. The image peeled away, revealing flesh-gray limbs. Too many joints, too many teeth. The monster had followed me out. It never needed the mine. It only needed what I remembered. I turned and ran, sun baking my skin, lungs ripping apart from the inside. My boots slipped in loose sand, but I pushed harder. I could see the rise ahead. Beyond it, the highway would cut through the world like a silver lifeline. The desert wailed behind me, a bellowing roar that made the sky tremble. I didn't dare look back, not until I slammed against metal, my RV. The air rushed from my lungs. For a moment, the world spun in disbelief. Somehow, I'd made it back. Freedom was one door latch away. I fumbled with the handle, palms slick with blood and sweat. The growl behind me grew deeper, closer. The ground shook as something massive bounded forward through the sand. The handle clicked. I threw myself inside, slamming the door shut and twisting the lock so hard the metal groaned. The whole vehicle rocked violently as the creature rammed into the side, scraping claws dragging along the aluminum. I stumbled to the driver's seat, jamming the keys into the ignition. My fingers trembled so badly I missed the slot twice, breath snapping in panic. A pale arm smashed against the passenger window, cracking the glass into a spider web of fractures. The engine coughed. Once, twice. Come on! Come on! I slammed my fist against the dash. The engine roared alive. Tires spun sand into a storm as I floored the gas, the RV jerking violently forward. The window burst inward behind me, shards flying, and a scream shredded the air as the creature lunged. But the RV surged ahead. Its claws scraped metal, leaving deep scars. For one horrifying second, I felt the weight of it, climbing, clinging, trying to haul itself in through the shattered window. I swerved hard, the vehicle tipping dangerously. The monster lost its grip, tumbling across the sand in a blur of gray limbs and teeth. I didn't slow down, not even as Ridgewell's buildings blurred past, the boarded windows staring like blackened eyes. Not as the town sign flashed by, its phrase etched into my skull, "Something found you in the desert." I didn't breathe until the cracked asphalt of the highway was beneath my wheels. Even then, I kept scanning the mirrors, expecting to see a pale figure cresting the ridge, sprinting after me. But nothing came. Miles passed. Hours. Nightfall. The desert became a strip of darkness on either side of the headlights. The radio stayed silent. Every engine rattle felt like a warning. Every shadow on the road made my pulse spike. But I kept driving, until civilization reappeared. Lights, buildings, noise. Life. I found the first open rest stop and parked under a bright street lamp. My whole body sagged, exhaustion crushing down like gravity. I let the engine idle, hands glued to the wheel. Eventually, I forced myself to check the back of the RV. No monster, just debris, dust. Scratches across the wall that hadn't been there before. Proof. I collapsed onto the floor, sobbing, not from fear anymore, but grief and anger and finally acceptance, because now I knew the truth. The desert didn't take Evan. The desert kept him, and whatever lived in those abandoned towns feeds on the memories we love the most. It lures us back with guilt, with longing, with the pieces of ourselves we buried. So listen to me, especially if you camp alone, when your past calls to you from the desert, when a place you swore you forgot tugs at your heart, when a ghost town whispers that you left something behind. Don't go back, no matter how much a part of you wants to, no matter who you think you can save. Because some places in America aren't abandoned. They are waiting. And if you enter those forgotten towns in the night, you might escape the way I did. But a piece of you will always remain. And someday, it will rise from the sand to come home. I used to think the strangest sounds in the night were made by coyotes, that cracked, laughing wail that slips between the trees and echoes against your ribs. But that was before I camped by the orchard fire. Before I learned that sometimes the quietest nights hold the loudest kind of fear, the kind that doesn't echo out there in the woods, but somewhere inside you. It started like any other trip. My name's Ryan, I'm 35, a mechanic from Tucson, and I've been restoring my old Volkswagen Type 2, a 1978 Westphalia camper. I bought it as a rusted shell 2 years ago, stripped it down, rebuilt the frame, wired the interior lights myself, and painted it in faded orange, like a desert sunset that never ends. Every bolt in that van was something I touched with my own hands. It felt alive to me. Safe, reliable. That summer, I decided to drive north, up through California, then cut across into Oregon, just me, the van, and the miles. I wanted open air and silence. My last few months had been full of noise, a breakup, debts, and long nights wondering when I'd stop feeling stuck. Camping was supposed to clear my head. When I reached southern Oregon, I saw the orchard for the first time. A field of burnt apple trees along the highway, skeletal and charred from an old fire. A hand-painted sign leaned against a fence post, "Orchard Campground, open." The letters were faded, nearly gone. I almost drove past it, but something about the emptiness pulled me in. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe that quiet kind of dare that whispers to people who've been alone too long. The road was gravel and full of ruts. My van creaked like it was holding its breath as I drove deeper. Past the first few turns, I saw the orchard, acres of blackened trunks reaching out of the ground like fingers. There were still patches of green, and in some of the charred branches, small pale blossoms glowed like ghosts. It didn't make sense. It was too late in the season for them to bloom, and those trees had been burned to the bone. The campground itself was simple: a few picnic tables, a rusty water pump, and a faded ranger sign. I was the only one there. I parked the van near the edge of the orchard and stepped out into the wind. It smelled like damp earth and something sweet, almost like rot beneath sugar. That night, I sat in my van with the side door open, listening to the wind slip through the burnt trees. The silence was deep. No frogs, no crickets, just the faint hiss of branches rubbing. I cooked some beans on the small stove and stared at the flowers glowing out there in the dark. It felt peaceful in a strange way, like being at the edge of the world. Around midnight, I heard something. A soft, deliberate knock. 3 times. On the side of the van, I froze. My first thought was wind, then an animal, but it came again, slower this time. Knock, knock, knock. I turned off my lantern and held my breath. The night outside was thick and still. The knocking stopped. I sat there for minutes, my pulse loud in my ears. Then, faintly, from somewhere in the orchard, I heard movement, like footsteps crunching through leaves. I told myself it was probably a deer, or the wind knocking a loose branch. I closed the door, locked it, and tried to sleep. But sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those pale blossoms swaying in the dark, glowing faintly, like they were breathing. By morning, the world looked normal again. Sunlight spilled through the van windows, and the orchard looked less like a graveyard and more like a field waking up. I made coffee, stretched, and told myself I'd imagined it. I was tired, alone, maybe still carrying that tension from home. A little before noon, an old man showed up. He was driving a dented Ford truck, his hat low, a cigarette hanging from his lip. He slowed near my van, nodded, and said, "You camping here?" "Yeah," I said. Didn't realize anyone else was around. He laughed softly. "Ain't many come this way no more. Fire scared most off. You picked a strange place to park." "Yeah, I saw the sign on the road. Figured I'd take a look." He stepped out, leaned on the door, and looked at the orchard. "They don't die easy, those trees. Some nights looks like they're still burning. You staying long?" I told him maybe one more night. He just nodded and said, "Best not walk the rows after dark." Something in his tone wasn't a warning. It was a memory. After he drove off, I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. I walked out a bit into the orchard that afternoon. The ground was soft with ash. The trunks cracked like old bones, but here and there those blossoms kept showing up. Perfect, white, and impossibly alive. When I touched one, it was cold. Not cool like a flower in shade. Cold, like touching metal in winter. And beneath that cold, something else. A faint vibration, almost like breath. By sunset, I'd convinced myself I'd stay one last night. I told myself I'd leave early before the morning fog set in. But that evening, the air turned heavy. The sky darkened faster than it should have, and when I lit my lantern, the light seemed weaker than usual, like the night was swallowing it. Around 10, I heard the knock again. 3 times, always 3. I turned the light off and waited. The knocking didn't come from the door this time. It came from the back, near the engine hatch. Then soft footsteps moving along the side of the van. I whispered to myself, "It's just the wind." But I didn't believe it. Something brushed the van, slow like a hand dragging across the paint. Then silence again. When I finally gathered the courage to look, I cracked the curtain an inch. The orchard was still. The blossoms shone faintly under the starlight. And just beyond the first row of trees, a figure stood, tall, still, its head tilted as if listening. I couldn't make out its face, but I could see its outline. It looked like a man, but too thin, too stretched. He didn't move. I didn't breathe. After a long minute, he stepped back, disappearing between the black trunks. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with my back against the van door, every light off, every nerve tight as wire. When dawn finally broke, the blossoms were gone. The branches were bare. But on the side of the van, where the paint had been brushed, there were handprints, dark like soot pressed into the orange metal. I wiped them off. The smudges didn't come away easy. The skin of my hand tingled where it touched the marks. And that smell, the sweet, rotting sugar smell, was stronger now. I should have left right then. But I didn't, because something about that orchard felt unfinished, like it was holding on to something it wanted me to see. By the time the sun climbed over the ridge, the orchard looked alive again. Dew clung to the burned bark, and the light caught on it in a way that almost looked like fire. I made coffee, tried to tell myself I'd dreamed everything, the knocking, the figure, the blossoms, all of it. But denial is a fragile thing. When I stepped outside, the air was different, heavier. It smelled like wet ash and overripe fruit, as if something had turned inside the soil overnight. I was kneeling near the water pump when I noticed something strange at the base of one of the trees, a small blackened tin tag nailed into the trunk. Most of the orchard trees had burned smooth, no bark left, but this one still had a tag. I brushed away the ash and saw numbers scratched into it, 07-18-2002. The metal was hot, even though the air was cool. Beneath the tag, faint letters were carved into the trunk, C. Hargrove. The name stirred something faintly familiar. Maybe I'd seen it in a news story or on a missing person flyer years ago. I couldn't remember. But the longer I looked at that tag, the more wrong it felt, like I'd uncovered something that didn't want to be seen. When I got back to the van, I found something else. In the dust that had gathered on my windshield overnight, someone had drawn a small circle with a cross through it, the kind of mark orchard workers use when tagging diseased trees. Only this was drawn on my glass right where I'd look out first thing in the morning. I wiped it away, my hand shaking. The ash smeared but didn't vanish. I thought about leaving, just throwing everything back in the van and driving until the orchard disappeared in my rearview mirror. But some stubborn, self-destructive part of me wanted to understand what was happening. I think that's the same part that kept me in bad relationships too long. The part that believed if I just looked long enough, I could fix what was broken. By late afternoon, clouds rolled in from the west. The air turned electric, the kind that hums just before a storm. I set up a small fire near the van, more for comfort than heat. The wind stirred the ash into small ghosts that danced along the ground. And then, for the first time since I'd arrived, I heard another voice. It came from the orchard, faint, almost like singing. A woman's voice, low and cracked with distance. I stood, trying to catch the direction. It sounded like she was humming a lullaby, something old, out of tune, but strangely soothing. I called out, "Hello? Are you okay?" But the voice didn't answer. It only drifted deeper between the rows of black trees, pulling me with it. I grabbed my flashlight and started walking. The beam caught on the blossoms again, hundreds of them now. They weren't there that morning, I was sure of it. The petals were faintly translucent, and beneath their surface something pulsed, a dim red glow that flickered like embers. The humming grew louder. I moved between the rows, the ash crunching under my boots. Every tree I passed had that same faint tag, each carved with a different name. Some tags had melted and fused into the bark. Others were freshly nailed, the metal bright and new. Then I saw her. A woman in a faded red dress standing about 20 feet away. Her back was to me, hair long and dark, unmoving despite the wind. She was standing beneath a tree that had split in half from the old fire, one side living, one side charred. Her hands were pressed to the trunk. The blossoms above her seemed to tremble. I called again. "Ma'am, you need help?" She didn't turn, but when I took another step closer, she whispered, soft, broken, like the words had to crawl out of her throat. "They don't die here." The air around me shifted, like the temperature dropped 10 degrees at once. My flashlight flickered, sputtered, and went dark. The humming stopped, and in that sudden silence I heard the sound of something creaking, wood bending, splitting, like roots pulling free from the earth. I turned and ran. Branches whipped my arms as I stumbled through the orchard, no sense of direction left. Behind me, something moved. Slow at first, then faster, matching my pace. I could hear the brittle crackle of steps in ash, the faint sound of breath, wet and uneven. When I reached the edge of the clearing, I saw the light of my campfire still burning. I sprinted toward it, slammed the van door shut behind me, and locked it again. My chest burned. My hands shook so hard I could barely hold the lantern. Then I heard it, faint scratching on the outside of the van near the door. Not claws, fingertips. Long, slow drags down the metal. I yelled, a raw, instinctive sound, and the scratching stopped. For the next hour, I sat in silence. I kept expecting the woman's face to appear in the window or the knocking to start again, but nothing happened. Just the wind, the orchard settling, my breath. Sometime near dawn, exhaustion won. I fell asleep with my head against the window. When I woke, everything was still, too still. The air outside looked washed out, colorless. The fire had burned down to ash. But the strangest thing was the orchard. The blossoms were gone again, every last one. And where the woman had been standing, the ground was charred in a perfect circle, blacker than the rest, like something had burned there in the night. I drove into town that morning, about 20 miles east. There was a small diner by the highway, the kind that smells like bacon and old coffee. The waitress there, a woman named Maggie, asked where I'd come from. I told her the Orchard Campground. Her face changed. A subtle, uneasy look, like she'd heard that name before but didn't want to. That place ain't open, she said. Hasn't been for years. I told her about the sign, about the old man in the truck. She frowned, shook her head. Old man in a Ford? That'd be Bill Hargrove. He owned the orchard before the fire. And the fire was when, I asked. July 2002. The tag, the date. She leaned in a little. Bill died in it. They said he went back in to look for his daughter. Never found her body. I felt the blood drain from my face. What was her name? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Clara, she said. Clara Hargrove, the name from the tag. When I drove back toward the orchard that afternoon, against every ounce of reason I had left, the sign was gone. The turnoff looked different too, overgrown, like no one had driven that road in years. I stopped where the gravel started, staring at the path that wasn't there anymore. And yet, when the wind blew just right, I swore I could smell it again. That faint sweetness, that burnt sugar scent that stuck to the back of your throat. Maybe the orchard doesn't exist anymore. Maybe I'd found some forgotten scar in the land, where the past still breathed beneath the ash. Or maybe, and this is what keeps me awake most nights, maybe those trees really do bloom at night. I didn't mean to go back a second time. I told myself I was just driving north again, just passing through. But the truth is, when something unsettles you that deeply, when it carves its shape into your memory, it never really lets you go. I wanted proof that what I saw had a reason. I wanted to put logic over the fear. I wanted to feel sane again. A few days later, I was camped along the river near Grants Pass, still sleeping in the Volkswagen. I couldn't rest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those blossoms glowing between the trees, felt the handprints pressed into my van's paint. Even the smell followed me. Faint, but there, like the memory of something burnt. I kept thinking about that circle on the windshield, the way it had been drawn with purpose. On the fourth night, the dreams began. I was standing in the orchard again, the trees around me tall and black. I heard Clara humming that same broken tune. In the dream, she was closer than before, her voice soft as breath on my neck. When I turned, she whispered, "It wasn't the fire that took us." I woke up drenched in sweat. The air in the van was freezing. My breath came out in clouds. It was late, 3:17 a.m. The van's clock flickered once, then went dark. I turned the key, but the ignition didn't catch. The battery was new. I'd checked it before the trip. Then I saw it, smeared across the inside of the windshield again, the same small circle with a cross. Only this time it was drawn from the inside. That broke something in me. I started the van by rolling it down the gravel path, pumping the clutch, forcing it to catch. When the engine finally roared to life, I didn't care where I was going. I just drove. The road wound north, dark forest pressing close on either side. Rain began to fall, tapping hard against the roof. Then, through the mist, the sign appeared again. Orchard Campground. Open. It shouldn't have been there. I'd seen the road vanish. I should have been miles away. But there it was, as clear as it had been the first time. I don't know what possessed me to turn in. Maybe some part of me knew that whatever had started there wouldn't end until I faced it. Maybe I just needed to see the orchard once more to know it was real. The road was the same, rutted, narrow, the air thick with fog. My headlights cut through the gray and found the same clearing, the same dead water pump, the same leaning signpost. I parked the van exactly where it had been before. The engine ticked as it cooled, the sound loud in the silence. The blossoms were already out, hundreds of them glowing faintly under the low clouds. The air carried that sickly sweetness again, sugar and rot. I stepped outside with my flashlight and stood at the edge of the orchard. The trees seemed closer now, their branches arching over like ribs forming a cage, and beneath that pale glow I saw them, faint shapes moving among the trunks. Not animals, not people exactly. They moved too slowly, too smoothly, like smoke trying to remember what it was before it burned. The hum started again, low like wind through hollow wood. Then the voice joined it. Clara's, unmistakable this time. "You shouldn't have come back." I spun toward the sound, the flashlight beam shaking in my hand. She stood between two trees, her dress drifting like it was underwater. Her skin looked gray in the light, her hair falling over one eye. She was looking at the van. "What happened here?" I asked. My voice came out hoarse, desperate. She didn't answer at first, just touched the trunk of a nearby tree, one that still held blossoms. "They planted us," she whispered, "to make sure we stayed." The branches above her quivered. The blossoms began to fall, not like petals, but like ash. And as they landed, they hissed softly against the ground, burning tiny black marks into the soil. "The fire didn't start by accident," she said. "It was meant to keep it from spreading, but it was too late. It wasn't the trees they were trying to stop." I took a step closer. The air between us shimmered with heat, though the night was cold. "What are you talking about?" Her eyes lifted to mine. For the first time, I saw them clearly, hollow, bright, reflecting the faint red glow pulsing in the blossoms. The orchard fed on us. It still does. The humming grew louder. The trees groaned, their branches twisting, creaking like old bones. The smell of burning sugar thickened until I could barely breathe. I stumbled back, tripping over a root. My flashlight hit the ground and went dark. In the darkness, shapes closed in, dozens of them, faces half-formed, eyes glinting faintly in the red light. I could hear whispers now, fragments of names, dates, the same names I'd seen on the tags. One of them reached toward me. A hand, thin, charred, brushed my sleeve. The fabric smoldered where it touched. I ran. I don't remember choosing a direction. I just remember the trees closing around me, the glow shifting with every step. When I looked back, the orchard seemed endless, row after row stretching on forever. The hum turned into a roar, like fire alive again, and beneath it, Clara's voice, "Leave it. Let it die." I stumbled out of the trees and into the clearing by the van. The blossoms were still falling, coating the ground in faint red dust. I yanked the door open, dove inside, and slammed it shut. As I turned the key, the engine roared back immediately, like it had been waiting. The headlights flicked on, cutting through the fog. For a split second, I saw her standing in front of the van, her hand pressed against the hood, her face calm, almost sad. Then she stepped back and the fog swallowed her whole. I drove until the orchard disappeared behind me, until the dawnlight turned the sky the color of rust. I didn't stop until I reached the main road. When I finally pulled over hours later, the van smelled like burnt apples. The smell clung to the air vents, the seat cushions, even my clothes. I got out, looked at the hood, and there, right where her hand had touched, was a perfect blossom pressed into the metal. It looked alive, but when I brushed it, it crumbled into ash. That was 3 years ago. I sold the van last winter. I told myself I was ready to move on, that I didn't want reminders of what I saw. But some nights, I dream I'm driving again, headlights cutting through fog, the radio humming static that almost sounds like a voice. Sometimes when I wake up, I swear I can still smell it. That burnt sweetness, that hint of bloom. People ask why I don't camp anymore. Why I don't fix up another Volkswagen. Why I stay close to home. I tell them it's because I learned something out there, something I can't forget. There are places in this country that remember what we try to bury, places that keep burning long after the fire's gone out. And some trees, no matter how deep the roots burn, will always find a way to bloom again, because what dies in the dark doesn't always stay there. And sometimes when the night is quiet enough and the wind carries that faint, sweet scent of sugar and smoke, you can still hear her humming. They bloom at night, always at night. I should have trusted the silence. My name is Mark. I'm 38 years old, and I've spent almost every vacation of my adult life sleeping in the back of my Volkswagen camper, chasing the freedom of open sky and pine-scented air. I've always believed the wilderness is where you find your real self, away from the screens, the traffic, the weight of a life that's too loud to hear your own heartbeat. But Crater Lake taught me something I'll never forget. Sometimes the silence isn't peace. Sometimes it's a warning. I drove into the park late in the afternoon, sunlight sliding like gold paint across the pumice cliffs. That lake, God, it's unreal. The blue doesn't just look like water, it looks like something alive, something too deep to reveal its thoughts. And yet, I felt drawn to it, like a moth circling a lamp that doesn't want company. The campground I chose was tucked away from the crowds. Dense pines, a nearby trail, the lake a short hike away. The ranger who checked me in barely made eye contact. He slid my map over the counter with a stiff hand and said, "Stay near the fire after dark. Don't let the quiet fool you." It sounded like a joke delivered without humor. I laughed awkwardly. He didn't. That should have been the first red flag. I set up camp just as the sun dipped behind Wizard Island, turning the lake into a dark mirror. The Volkswagen's pop-top canvas fluttered in the chilly wind, and I layered up. Nights fall fast in the Cascades. Shadows stretch long, hunger-thin, like they're reaching for you. I told myself this was exactly what I wanted. Solitude. A reminder that fear was just a trick of the mind. The forest told me otherwise. Dinner was simple. Canned chili heated over the flame, steam rising into the air like breath. After washing up, I leaned back in a camp chair, listening. The famous calm of Crater Lake, the kind of hush you pay money to escape toward. No insects buzzing, no frogs croaking, not even the crack of a twig from deer moving through underbrush. It was too quiet. Even the fire crackled like it was trying not to be heard. When I was a kid, my grandfather used to warn me about places where nature goes still. Predators do that, he'd say. When they want everything to know something's hunting. I used to think he meant mountain lions or wolves. Now I'm not so sure he did. I tried checking the ranger brochure for large predators in the area, looking for a rational reason to feel the hairs rising on my arms. Bears, sure. Maybe a cougar. Nothing I hadn't camped with before. But then I noticed a line handwritten at the bottom of the rules page. If you hear scratching near the vehicle, do not look outside. I stared at that sentence. Thin, shaky penmanship. Someone wrote that in a hurry. Someone who knew it mattered. A cold breeze cut through the pines, smelling like deep water and stone. My fire sputtered low. My heartbeat felt loud enough to draw attention. Don't be dramatic, I told myself. You wanted isolation. This is isolation. So why did it feel like isolation wanted me? I stoked the fire higher, forcing comfort into the dark. The warmth hugged my shins, but the woods behind me felt colder than before, like winter had pooled there specifically for me. I turned around every few seconds without meaning to. My instincts were jumping like startled birds. Then, footsteps. Slow. Heavy. A single set. Pine needles crunching with a rhythm that wasn't deer-like. Too deliberate. I froze. The footsteps stopped just short of the tree line. I swallowed the sand-dry lump in my throat and whispered into the dark, "Hello?" No answer, but something breathed. A low droning inhale, wet, like water-filled lungs dragging against ribs. Then the smell hit me. Not the musk of an elk or the sharp tang of a predator. This smelled like the bottom of a lake, like algae rotting on stones, like dead fish left in sun. It was wrong. The instinct that's older than language screamed one clear message: do not move. But fear doesn't listen to logic when imagination joins the hunt. My mind pictured shapes, elongated legs, slick fur dripping with lake water, jaws that could split open wider than they should. I grabbed my flashlight. My hand shook as my thumb hovered over the switch. "Don't shine the light," part of me begged. "If you can't see it, maybe it can't see you." Another part, the stubborn, stupid piece of humanity that hates feeling powerless, wanted to expose the threat, to prove it wasn't real. I clicked the beam on. The light cut through the dark like a blade and landed on nothing. Only trees swaying slightly in the wind, their shadows long but harmless. Except the smell remained. Heavy. Close. Then the footsteps continued, behind me this time. My light snapped in that direction. Again, nothing. But now my heartbeat wasn't alone. I could hear it. Another heartbeat, laborious, thudding against a chest too wide, too close. The unseen presence circled, invisible, between flashes of steel blue moonlight breaking through clouds. A sudden scratch raked the side of my van. I jumped to my feet, pulse crashing in my ears. The fire popped sharply, throwing sparks into the air, and in that burst of light, I saw movement. Not a shape, just a blur, low and fast, slipping between trees like smoke wearing teeth. It ran on 4 legs. Explosive power. Too big to be a coyote, too silent to be a wolf, and no dog smells like a drowned corpse. I stumbled back until the metal of the Volkswagen pressed cold against my spine. My breath came out in foggy bursts, visible fear dissolving into the night. Then a sound I'll never forget. A bark. But not the kind you hear at a park or from a neighbor's porch. This bark was wet, garbled, half choked like something trying to imitate a dog after drowning. One bark, then another. Then a voice trying to form a word inside the third bark. Mar, no, that wasn't possible. It was trying to speak. I dropped the flashlight. It rolled away, spinning light like a warning siren across the forest floor. My fire guttered low again, barely keeping the dark at bay. The steps returned, faster, closing in, circling tighter. There was no more pretending this was a normal animal, no more telling myself fear was just the absence of noise. The noise was here. The fear had a shape, and it wanted me. I lunged for the Volkswagen sliding door, yanked it open, and scrambled inside. My hands fumbled with the lock. Click, just as something slammed against the outside panel. The whole van shuddered. Then slow scratching right next to my ear. Long claws. Testing. Searching. The smell seeped through the seams of the door. The breathing grew louder. My name rattled through the night air again, mangled and wrong. Mar our ark. I held my breath until spots formed in my eyes. Silence returned, the kind that suffocates. I thought it had left. But then the scratching started up on the roof. The scratching above me dragged slowly from the back of the van toward the windshield, claws tracing a map of my terror. The Volkswagen creaked under the shifting weight of something too heavy for a normal dog. My breath turned shallow, like my lungs were refusing this air, refusing this reality. I stayed curled tight in the dark, barely daring to blink, every tiny sound magnified. Metal whining beneath shifting paws, nails testing each seam in the roof. A wet drip hitting the glass, sliding downward like lake water that refused to dry. I squeezed my eyes shut and whispered to myself, "It's curiosity, not hunger." But the part of me that still believed in survival, the primal remnant evolution didn't erase, knew that wasn't true. The creature sniffed near the pop-top canvas, its breath sticky and uneven. I pictured jaws dragging across fabric, teeth catching, ripping downward like a zipper made of terror. Every muscle locked. Even my heartbeat seemed afraid to move. The wind picked up, moaning through the pines, except it wasn't the wind. It was a howl. Low, trembling, mournful, but gurgling like it came through water. A sound that shouldn't exist. A sound that came from something that shouldn't breathe. The creature answered itself. 3 short barks, each one cracking like a throat full of lake stones. Then a pause, a shift in weight, silence, until claws scraped down the front windshield. I couldn't look, but I could feel it. The thin sheet of glass separating me from what? A dog dragged from the drowned depths, a wolf that learned to walk out of the lake, something older, hungrier, shaped by volcanic darkness and years of silence. My fingers scrabbled blindly for anything: pepper spray, a flashlight, a weapon. But all I found was my grandfather's old silver whistle, the one he'd given me the day he told me about silent forests and predators waiting. He'd pressed it into my palm and said, "If instinct tells you to run and you can't, at least try to make something run from you." I clenched it in my fist. Outside, the creature stopped moving. I could hear it breathing right above the steering wheel, like it was listening, like it knew I'd found something that might change the rules. Its claws tapped the glass twice, testing. Then it spoke again, this time clearer. Mark. It wasn't guessing. It knew me. My throat closed. My name had never sounded more like a threat. I had two options: stay silent and pray, or accept that prey doesn't survive by hoping. I lifted the whistle to my lips, slow, steady, and blew. The sound pierced the night like a jet of pure fear. It cut through silence, through trees, through something unseen. My ears rang. My heart slammed against my ribs. The creature shrieked. Not a bark, not a howl. A raw, screeching agony that vibrated through the van. It leapt off the roof, thump, and I felt earth tremble. Snarling echoed around me as it paced outside, furious, confused. I'd heard it, or scared it, or both. Branches snapped as something huge crashed into the forest, circling wide. The night swallowed the sound of it moving, but the smell, rotted lake water, lingered like a curse. I didn't move, not for minutes, maybe hours. When I finally dared to breathe again, I checked the time on my phone. 2:14 a.m. No service. The fire outside had died into a grave of ash. The moon hid behind clouds like it didn't want to witness what came next. I told myself, stay awake, keep watch. But fear is exhausting, and cold seeps into bones that stay still too long. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking, not to sound, no scratching, no breathing, not even wind. I woke to smell. Wet fur, stagnant lake water, rot. Inside the van, my blood turned to ice. The windows were fogged from the inside. Tiny circles wiped clear by something pressing its nose against the glass from within moments before. I wasn't alone. I clutched the whistle. My fingers felt numb, stiff with terror. My eyes scanned the dim interior: sink, cabinets, sleeping bag, shadows. One of the shadows moved, slow, deliberate. A shape rose from the space between the front seats, too tall, neck bending wrong, joints clicking. It unfolded like it wasn't used to moving above water. And then I saw its eyes, reflective, gold green. Canine, but too intelligent, watching me with curiosity and hunger. It was inside, and it had been watching me sleep. My scream got trapped behind my teeth. The creature cocked its head like a confused pet, if pets had jaws that unhinged wide enough to swallow a man's arm whole. It reached a paw toward me, no, a hand with elongated fingers tipped by claws, and tapped my chest. Not attacking, testing. I forced air into my lungs and blew the whistle again, panicked, uneven. The shriek tore the silence apart. The thing reeled back, slamming into the van door so hard the metal warped. It howled, grabbing its ears, its paws, its head. It slammed itself again and again until... click! The rear hatch popped open. Cold air rushed in. The creature bolted, crawling backward on all fours with unnatural speed, disappearing into the trees like a nightmare diving into deep water. I scrambled up front, slammed the hatch shut, and jammed the lock. My breath came in frantic bursts, tasting like adrenaline and pure survival. Don't stay here. Don't wait for round two. I turned the key. The engine coughed, once, twice, then died. No, please. I tried again, and again. The van remained dead. I wasn't getting out of this mountain tonight. A new thought seeped in, colder than the air. It didn't come from the woods. It came from the lake, which meant it would come back. And next time, the whistle might not save me. Dawn felt a lifetime away. The silence returned, heavier, hungrier. Somewhere beyond the tree line, water dripped, the forest inhaled, and something large began moving closer again. This time, faster. The footsteps returned quicker this time. No stealth, no circling. Just direct, urgent movement slicing through the forest floor. Whatever lived beneath that lake wasn't curious anymore. It was coming back to finish what it started. I grabbed my flashlight with one hand and the whistle with the other. The van shuddered again. Something slamming against the passenger door hard enough to dent steel. A growl seeped through the thin wall, vibrating like a boat engine submerged too deep. The handle twitched. It was trying to get in the same way a human would. I pressed my back into the opposite wall, heart pounding like hooves inside my chest, and blew the whistle a third time, pouring every ounce of terror into the breath behind it. The sound shot outward like a sonic spear. The scraping stopped, then an anguished roar, far less canine this time, more like a person whose throat had forgotten how to speak, rattled the windows. Something thrashed through branches, crashing away from the van. I heard splintering wood, then nothing. For a moment I believed I had won, until I realized it wasn't running. It was gathering distance, to charge. There was only one chance left, move. Even if the engine refused to turn, I needed distance, a barrier, something. The nearest ranger station wasn't far by trail, maybe a mile or two, but distance twists when panic fuels your steps. I unlatched the van door as quietly as possible, every click a scream in the silence. The metal groaned. I winced. My flashlight beam wobbled across the pines. Every tree looked like teeth. Every shadow looked like intent. I slipped out, locking the door behind me as if that still meant safety, and forced my legs toward the trail. Gravel crunched beneath my boots. Too loud, too revealing. Behind me, the lake exhaled, a slow, massive swell slapping shore. I walked faster. The trail twisted through a tunnel of dense trees. The smell of wet fur still clung to the back of my tongue. My legs threatened to buckle, but adrenaline kept them burning forward. Halfway down the path, my flashlight flickered. Once, twice. It died. Darkness swallowed everything. I slapped it. Nothing. My breath grew sharp. My pulse felt like footsteps in my ears. I held the whistle tight. If I blew it now, he'd come. So I didn't. The moon slipped between clouds for just a moment, pale illumination revealing a wooden sign ahead, trail to ranger station, 1.4 miles. Almost there. A branch snapped behind me. I froze, slowly turned, nothing but black between trunks. Then 2 reflective spots hovering low, staring right into me. The eyes blinked, not in unison. One lagged behind the other, like it was remembering how blinking worked. I lifted the whistle, hands trembling, ready to blow. But a voice low and desperate whispered from the trees, "Don't run." I staggered backward. That wasn't the creature's voice. This one was breathless, broken, human. "Who's there?" My voice cracked like I'd borrowed it and didn't know how to use it. A figure emerged, hunched and gaunt, wearing a shredded ranger jacket soaked with lake water. Mud clung to his skin like algae trying to make him drown on land. His hair hung in mats, and his eyes reflected fear more than light. He raised a trembling hand. "No whistle," he said. "It only makes him angrier. It hurts, but it teaches him." I stared, chest tight. What the hell is happening here? He swallowed like the motion was painful. "Don't go RV camping in Crater Lake," he croaked, "unless you want to meet a cryptid dog." His words, the same as the story I thought I was writing, felt like a message meant for me long before I ever set foot here. "Is that thing a dog?" I asked. He shook his head slowly, a shudder rippling through him. "It used to be, before it drowned, before it learned to walk out of the lake again. It hunts campers, ones who stay alone, ones it can mimic." My skin crawled. "Mimic?" I whispered. "That's how it learns names," he said. "It hears yours in the dark. Then it practices. It tries to get better each night." I nearly dropped the whistle. "How do you know all this?" His jaw clenched, his gaze flicked toward the lake. "Because it used to mimic me." Then he stepped closer into moonlight, and I saw it. Bite marks. Enormous. Torn through his back. Flesh puckered like something had dragged him underwater and chewed him into silence. His leg bent wrong, splinted with a broken branch and coated in sap. He was prey that somehow escaped. "I tried to leave," he said, voice cracking, "but he doesn't like losing food, and you just told him where to find you." A howl rose from the shoreline, longer, closer. No water gargle this time. He was getting better. The ranger, if he was still truly human, grabbed my arm. His grip was freezing. "Unnatural. We need to get somewhere with walls," he whispered. "Not canvas, steel, concrete." "The ranger station," I said. He shook his head. "No, he knows it too well." Branches cracked. Claws scraped rock. The eyes were back, another set. then a third. Oh God, there wasn't just one. The ranger's voice became a hiss. Run, don't look back. My lungs burst into action before my mind did. I sprinted, heart slamming, branches whipping my face. The path tilted uphill, roots tripping my feet. Every gasp felt like needles in my ribs. Behind me, multiple shapes crashed through the trees. Faster, gaining. The ranger limped beside me with impossible speed, fear giving him strength bones shouldn't have. He pointed toward an old fire lookout tower barely visible through pines, wooden stairs spiraling into dark. That's our only chance. The ground vibrated as the creatures hit the trail, snarls slicing the air behind us. I hit the first step and nearly fell, legs trembling, hands slick with sweat. I climbed anyway, higher, faster. The ranger behind me shoved his weight upward, grunting with every step. Halfway up, I risked a glance down. A massive shape leapt, jaws gaping wide, teeth like needles bent inward. Eyes glowing like moonlight trapped underwater. It missed my boot by inches. I screamed, scrambling upward until the lookout cabin slammed open above me. I dove inside and slammed the door. The ranger collapsed onto the floorboards. Below us, 3 creatures circled the stairs. Tails twitching, bodies dripping dark puddles that steamed against cold wood. We'd bought time, not escape. The ranger pulled a soaked notebook from his jacket pocket and shoved it into my hands. If you live, he whispered, tell everyone. There, in water-warped writing, was a single line repeated like a prayer. Do not look at the lake at night. Do not listen when it speaks your name. Do not run alone. A heavy thud hit the side of the tower, then another, and another. They were trying to knock it down. The ranger reached for the whistle in my hand. No, he whispered. I'll call him. You climb down the opposite side. Run at first light. Don't look back. I stared at him, frozen. You can't. He'll kill you. He smiled. A hollow, broken thing. He already did. Before I could stop him, he ripped the whistle from my grip and blew. The shriek that followed wasn't just sound, it was violence. Something below roared back, and the tower lurched. The whistle scream tore through the dark like it had ripped the sky open. The creatures below convulsed, thrashing, claws carving trenches into the wooden supports as they howled in agony. The tower shuddered like it stood on the edge of collapse. The ranger's face twisted in pain, too. And in that moment, I understood the truth. He wasn't using the whistle on them. He was using it on himself to draw them away from me. I died 2 nights ago, he gasped through clenched teeth. I just haven't stopped breathing yet. The words gutted me. The tower leaned hard right, a groan ripped from the nails holding our fragile sanctuary together. One support beam cracked, splinters showering downward like falling stars. The ranger shoved me toward the opposite window. Climb, he choked out. You wait for dawn, or you give him a new name to speak tonight. I stared at him, the man who had been prey long enough to become an unwilling decoy. I'm not leaving you, I said. But fear wobbled my voice. I'm not. His hand whipped out lightning fast, gripping my jacket collar. You survive, he rasped, and you warn the next idiot with a Volkswagen. Then he blew the whistle again, sharp and long, and the wood beneath his knees cracked apart. One creature slammed into the tower with the force of a car crash. The ranger and half the floorboards disintegrated into the night. I lunged forward, too slow, and saw him fall into the snarling chaos below. The creatures swarmed him with maddening hunger. His scream spiraled upward, tangled with a deep, bubbling gurgle from something dragging him toward the shadows at the edge of the lake. And then, silence. No whistle, no ranger, only me, and them. The tower teetered, crooked as a broken tooth. One more hit, and I'd drop right into their jaws. There was no time for grief. Grief is a luxury the living can't afford when death is sprinting. I scrambled out the window onto the back supports, fingers numb from cold and fear. The beams creaked beneath me but held. My boots found the studs and I climbed down the far side, staying in shadow, breathing shallow, praying silently. The creatures snarled and tore into the tower again, but focused on where the ranger had fallen. His sacrifice was the only reason I was still moving. 15 feet up. 10. 7. On the last drop, I hit the dirt wrong. Pain shot up my ankle. But I bit down on the panic and forced myself to run. Adrenaline turned agony into background noise. I didn't dare turn around. The forest chased me with howls that sounded more human with each breath they took. Mark! 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 It knew my name perfectly now. The trail opened, a sliver of sky glimmering ahead. The lake was to my left, black, endless, waiting. I kept my gaze locked forward. The ranger's notebook burned in my pocket like a warning. Don't look at the lake at night. The van came into view, dented, claw-scarred, but still standing. Hope slammed through me so hard I tasted metal. I dove inside, slammed the door, locked every latch, every window. Hands shaking, I turned the key. The engine sputtered, coughed, clicked. No, not now, please. I slammed both fists on the steering wheel and turned the key again. The engine roared to life. Something massive crashed into the rear bumper, bouncing the van forward. I hit the gas. Gravel spit behind me as the Volkswagen surged ahead, headlights finally slicing through the dark. The rear window cracked but held. The shape behind me faded into trees, roaring its fury into the dying night. I sped faster than any park ranger would forgive, the whistle glinting on the dashboard like a tiny silver heart still beating. Only when the first watercolor strokes of dawn colored the horizon did I finally exhale. The creature's howls faded behind me, swallowed by daylight and distance. I didn't slow until the park entrance sign appeared in the rear view, and even then I didn't stop. Not until I hit cell service. Not until I reached a gas station miles away, collapsing next to a fuel pump, sobbing like survival cost more than my heart was prepared to pay. People at the station asked if I needed help, if I was okay, if I'd been attacked by a bear. A bear doesn't whisper your name. I left Crater Lake that morning with the ranger's ruined notebook stuffed in my glove compartment. The ink smeared, but the warnings still legible enough to keep me alive. For months afterward, I heard it sometimes at night when sleep kept its distance. Mark. A gentle bark, a gurgling whimper, the lake waiting for its lost thing to return. Every instinct begs me to never go back. But instincts are complicated. They protect us until the moment they betray us. I still camp. I still chase the peace of quiet places. But if isolation ever feels too still, if fire crackles too softly, if the wind holds its breath, I pack up and drive toward noise. Because I know now what silence really means out there. You're not alone. You're being hunted. So if you ever take your RV to Crater Lake, don't stay by yourself. Don't listen when it growls your name. And for God's sake, don't answer the barking. I used to think abandoned RV parks were peaceful, that they were just old campgrounds left behind by time, ghost towns for travelers. But when you sleep alone in a Volkswagen on cracked asphalt surrounded by rusted hookups and overgrown weeds, peace turns into something else. It becomes a mirror. It shows you what's hiding inside yourself. Last fall, I was driving across Arizona, following an old route I'd planned years ago when life made more sense. I'd taken a few weeks off from work, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to breathe. My father had passed earlier that year, and the silence he left behind followed me like static. He used to take me camping in our old Volkswagen bus, that faded orange relic he swore would never die. When I finally bought one for myself 20 years later, I told myself I'd do what he never had the chance to do. Travel alone, see the back roads, find meaning in the quiet. That's what I told myself, anyway. By the second week of the trip, I'd started avoiding crowded campgrounds. Families laughing by the fire made me restless. Their joy felt foreign. So I started staying in places that didn't exist on official maps. Old RV parks that had gone under, spots I found on forgotten travel forums or whispered about in online van life groups. That's how I found Dust Haven RV Park. It wasn't marked on Google Maps anymore. I only saw it mentioned once in a comment thread from 2014. Someone had written, "Don't stop there after dark. The park hums at night." At first I laughed. I figured they were talking about cicadas, maybe the sound of power lines. But something about the phrase stuck with me. The park hums. It was already late afternoon when I turned off the main highway. The sun was low enough to make everything gold and lonely. The entrance sign was split down the middle, Dust Haven RV Resort, faded blue paint curling off the wood. A chain hung across the drive, but it was old and brittle, easy enough to lift over. The pavement beyond was cracked, swallowed by desert grass. A few tilted lampposts stood like sentinels, their bulbs long gone. Rows of empty hookups stretched out ahead, each one with a concrete pad where someone once parked their home on wheels. I pulled my Volkswagen into one of the spots near the back. The air was still, not silent, but heavy. You could hear the faintest sound of the wind dragging across aluminum, like the park itself was breathing. I killed the engine and sat there, listening. Nothing but the ticking of the cooling metal. I stepped outside, and the first thing I noticed was the smell. Faint, metallic, like rain that never came. The second thing was the sound. Not a hum. Not exactly. It was more like a vibration, deep and distant, somewhere below hearing but still felt in the chest. It would rise and fall every few seconds, almost like it had rhythm. I walked the perimeter, careful to keep my flashlight pointed low. There were signs of old life everywhere. A broken lawn chair, a sun-bleached children's float, a rusted bike with one wheel missing. And near the far edge of the property there was a line of RVs, maybe 4 or 5, still parked in their original spots. They looked like relics. Each one was covered in dust, their windows opaque. I thought maybe squatters lived there, or someone had stored them years ago and forgotten. I didn't dare look inside. When the sun dipped below the horizon, I made a fire beside my van. I cooked a small meal, beans and rice, and watched the light fade until only my fire remained. That's when I heard it again. The hum. Steady, pulsing, closer this time. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. It came from the direction of those abandoned RVs. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was the echo of the fire or some kind of old generator still buried in the ground. But the longer I sat there, the more I realized it had changed. It wasn't just a vibration anymore. It was layered, like multiple tones stacked together. And then it stopped. Just silence. That silence was worse than the sound itself, because silence makes you listen harder. And when I did, I heard something else. A door creaking open. My heart kicked hard in my chest. I killed the lantern and crouched beside the van, eyes fixed on the row of RVs. The moon was bright enough to cast faint shapes, long rectangles, windows glinting. I could swear one of them had a light on inside, dim, yellow, flickering like candlelight. Someone was there. I stood up slowly, trying to decide if I should call out, but every instinct told me not to. Instead, I eased into my van, locked the doors, and pulled the curtains shut. I left one small gap in the fabric, just enough to see out. For a long time, nothing moved. Then, at the far edge of the park, I saw a shadow. Tall, unsteady, drifting between the RVs. It didn't walk so much as stagger. And every few steps, it stopped as if listening. My breath fogged the glass. It wasn't until it got closer that I realized it was holding something. A lantern, maybe. The light swung with each step, catching bits of metal and peeling paint. I could hear the faint crunch of gravel under its boots. And then it spoke. At least I think it did. A voice, low and slurred like a bad radio signal. One word, repeated. Stay. I froze. My mind raced. Maybe it was a drunk, a squatter warning me off his territory. But there was something about the voice that didn't sound human. It had a tremor to it, a broken modulation like it was coming through layers of interference. I reached for my phone. No signal. Not even a bar. I should have left right then, but something in me wanted to understand. I don't know why. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was that same need that brought me out there in the first place. The need to face what scared me, to prove that I could be alone and still feel whole. So I waited. The shadow stopped halfway down the row and turned, facing my direction. The light from its lantern flickered across the side of my van. And in that brief flash, I saw its face, or what should have been its face. It was covered. A torn sheet, maybe a mask, something that clung too tight to the skull beneath. No eyes, no mouth, just the faint outline of bone pressed against fabric. The hum started again. This time it was coming from everywhere, from the ground, from inside my chest, even from the walls of my van. It built until it was all I could hear, and then suddenly, silence. And when I looked back through the curtain, the figure was gone. But the light from the lantern still glowed, faintly at the end of the row. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I just sat there inside my Volkswagen, hands shaking slightly on the steering wheel, waiting for the first light of morning to save me from whatever that was. The hum had faded into the distance, but even in its absence, the air seemed to vibrate. My bones felt tuned to something I couldn't hear. At some point, I turned on the ignition just to feel the engines purr beneath me. Something normal, something mechanical. It grounded me, but I kept the headlights off. I didn't want to draw attention to myself in case that figure was still out there, waiting in the dark. I told myself I'd leave at dawn, that all I had to do was wait a few hours. But waiting in that silence was its own kind of punishment. Every few minutes, I'd glance through the small slit in the curtains, half expecting to see that covered face pressed against the glass. Nothing. Just emptiness. Then, sometime around 4, I started to hear it again. Not the hum, but something else. A tapping, slow at first, deliberate. Metal on metal. Tap. Tap, tap. It was coming from the side of the van. I held my breath and reached toward the curtains, barely pulling them back. My reflection looked back at me in the window, pale and stretched. For a moment, I thought maybe it was just an acorn falling or the shifting of the van as it cooled. But then it came again. Faster now. Tap, 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 tap. I couldn't see anyone outside. But when I leaned just a little closer, I realized something horrifying. The tapping was coming from inside the van, somewhere beneath the floorboard or maybe in the panels. I jerked back instinctively, hitting my head on the cabinet. My breath came out ragged. I knew the sound of the van like I knew my own heartbeat, every creak, every groan. But this was different. It was rhythmic, intentional. I shut off the ignition and listened. The tapping slowed, like whatever caused it was mimicking my breathing. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. For a long time, I didn't move. When the sun finally broke over the horizon, it was like the entire place exhaled. The golden light spilled across the broken asphalt, catching on shattered glass and dew-soaked weeds. The fear that had swallowed me whole the night before began to loosen its grip, but it didn't disappear. It just hid somewhere behind my ribs. I stepped outside, blinking in the glare. The park looked smaller in daylight, harmless even. The row of abandoned RVs stood quiet and still, their windows dull and lifeless. No lanterns, no figures. And yet, when I walked toward them, I found something strange. Footprints. Not deep, just impressions in the dust, leading from the row of RVs straight to my van. Bare feet. Long steps. I followed them halfway until they disappeared into the gravel. The last print was only a few feet from where I'd parked. Something about that distance made my skin crawl. I circled the van, half expecting to see scratches or smudges on the paint. Nothing. The only sign anything had happened at all was the fine layer of dust shaken loose from the undercarriage. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something had been inside with me. I decided to leave, but when I turned the key, the engine sputtered, coughed, and died. I tried again. Nothing. The starter whined weakly and fell silent. The battery was drained. That didn't make sense. I'd only run the engine for a few minutes overnight. Frustration cut through the fear. I got out, popped the hood, and stared at the engine like it might explain itself. Everything looked normal. No frayed wires, no signs of tampering. But as I leaned closer, I noticed something smeared along the inside of the hood. A handprint. Not grease. Not dirt. Ash. It was gray, soft, and perfectly shaped, like someone had pressed their palm there with deliberate care. I wiped it away and checked the oil, the connections, anything that might have drained the battery. Nothing. The van had simply gone quiet. That's when I heard footsteps. Not heavy ones, soft, dragging, like someone walking through gravel barefoot. I turned slowly, scanning the empty park. 100 feet away, near the office building, stood a figure. Not the same one as last night. This one was shorter, thinner, wearing a faded denim jacket and jeans. They were turned slightly, face hidden beneath a mess of gray blonde hair. I called out, "Hey, you work here?" The figure didn't move. I tried again. "I just broke down. Do you know if there's another road out?" Silence. The person tilted their head like a curious animal. Then they turned and started walking toward the row of RVs. Not hurried, not afraid. Just calm, almost casual. I felt torn between following and leaving. Logic said get out, hike to the highway if I had to. But the curiosity that had brought me there in the first place whispered something else. Go see. Maybe they can help. So I followed. As I walked, I noticed something strange about the air. The way it seemed to ripple above the ground, like heat distortion, though it wasn't warm enough for that. The closer I got to the old RVs, the more that vibration returned, faint but distinct, humming through my shoes into my legs. The figure disappeared behind one of the RVs. I rounded the corner and froze. There was no one there, only the door to one of the trailers hanging open. Inside, it was dark, but not empty. The faint scent of dust and ozone filled the air, sharp enough to sting my nose. I shined my flashlight inside and took a hesitant step forward. The first thing I saw was a small table with a radio on it, an old, boxy model like the kind my dad used to keep in his garage. It was on. The red light flickered faintly, even though the power cord dangled loose, and from the speaker came that same low hum. I reached out and turned the dial. The pitch shifted, the hum rising until it turned into a whisper. Not words exactly, but fragments, syllables tumbling over static. Then beneath it, I heard my own voice. A recording. From last night. It was me, breathing, whispering hello, the faint creak of my van door. The exact sounds I'd made when I first arrived. My stomach dropped. I stepped back, heart racing, staring at the radio like it was alive. The hum deepened, almost mocking me now, pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat, and then, without warning, the radio snapped off. The silence that followed was absolute, until the voice came again, right behind me. Stay. I turned, flashlight shaking, but the doorway was empty. No one there, only the sound of my own panicked breath and the dry desert wind slipping through the cracks in the trailer walls. I stumbled backward, out of the RV, nearly tripping on the step. I ran to the van and jumped inside, slamming the door behind me. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold the key. I twisted the ignition again, and this time the engine roared to life like nothing had ever been wrong. I didn't wait. I peeled out of that lot, gravel spraying behind me. In the rearview mirror, the park shrank into a blur of metal and dust. But just before it vanished, I saw something that made my chest seize. All 5 of those abandoned RVs, their lights were on, every single one, and standing in front of them side by side were 5 figures, all facing me, all completely still. I didn't realize how far I'd driven until I saw the gaslight blinking. The desert stretched endlessly around me. Empty highways, dry brush, no signs, no towns. My pulse still pounded from what I'd seen. Every time I blinked, I saw those 5 shapes standing in the dust, the glow of those old RV windows flickering like candles in a funeral vigil. By the time I pulled over, the sun had already climbed high. The air shimmered with heat, and the road itself looked like it was melting into the horizon. I sat there behind the wheel, gripping it until my knuckles went white. I tried to tell myself it was just exhaustion, that I'd imagined it all. People see strange things when they're alone for too long. They hear echoes of their own fear and mistake it for something real. But the more I replayed that moment in my mind, the less I believed it. Because I hadn't imagined the smell of ash, or the voice, or that damn hum that had crawled inside my chest like static. When I finally reached a small diner outside of Winslow, I parked in the back and stumbled inside. The waitress, middle-aged, kind eyes, long braid, asked if I was okay. I told her I'd camped near an old RV park off Highway 87 and heard strange noises. Her expression shifted immediately. "You mean Dust Haven?" she asked. I nodded. She set the coffee pot down slowly. "You shouldn't have gone there. People stopped talking about that place a long time ago." I waited, but she hesitated before speaking again. "Used to be a big family place. Folks came from all over with their RVs in the 70s and 80s. Then something happened. They said a fire swept through the park one night. Electrical issue, maybe? 5 families died. Whole section of the park burned down before help could get there. They rebuilt, but it never reopened. Folks said the power lines still carried the charge from that night. My mouth went dry. 5 families? She nodded. 5 RVs, right there along the back row. I didn't tell her about the figures, or the lights, or the hum that seemed to come from the ground itself. I didn't want to sound insane, but something inside me knew she already understood more than she let on. I thanked her, paid for the coffee, and went back to the van. I could have turned north, gone home. It ended the trip right there. But I didn't, because something about that story didn't feel finished. I couldn't explain it. It wasn't morbid curiosity exactly. It was something deeper, like the park was calling me back, whispering through the vibration of the road beneath my tires. I told myself I just needed closure, to see it one last time in daylight, to prove to myself it wasn't what I thought. So that evening, I turned the Volkswagen around and drove back. The sun was setting by the time I reached the turnoff. The same golden light that had welcomed me the first night now seemed sharper. It sliced across the horizon in long, burning streaks. The signs still leaned sideways, half swallowed by weeds. When I crossed the threshold into the park again, the air changed. Not colder, heavier, denser, like it carried weight. The van engine sputtered once, but I pressed on until I reached the same cracked pad where I'd parked before. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it, the row of RVs, the empty hookups, the brittle grass. But something was missing. The hum. The silence was total. Even the desert wind seemed to hold its breath. I stepped out, keeping the door open behind me. The stillness was suffocating. My boots crunched on the gravel as I made my way toward the row of RVs. The closer I got, the more I realized how wrong the air felt. Too dry, too charged, like standing in the moment just before lightning strikes. I reached the first RV, a white Fleetwood with its paint peeling in sheets. The door was shut this time. I placed my hand on the handle, half expecting it to burn, but it was cold. I pulled. It creaked open an inch before stopping. Inside, darkness swallowed everything. I was about to turn back when I noticed something new. Footprints. Not just one set this time, but several. Bare feet, some small, some large, all leading in different directions. I followed one trail to the next RV. Its windows were cracked but clean, like someone had wiped them from the inside. I could see faint shapes, outlines of furniture maybe. Then, out of nowhere, the air vibrated. That hum. It started faintly, like a memory, then grew stronger, shaking the ground beneath me. It wasn't mechanical this time. It sounded organic. A chorus of low voices, resonating together in one deep note. My flashlight flickered. The sound built until it felt like the entire park was alive, humming with buried power. My breath came in gasps. Then I heard it, the same whisper, woven into the hum. Only now it wasn't just one voice. It was many. Stay. The word came from everywhere, from the trailers, from the ground, even from the air inside my lungs. I staggered back, shining the flashlight wildly. In its beam, I caught sight of movement inside the third RV. A hand pressed against the window from the inside. It left an imprint, pale gray like the ash I'd seen beneath my hood. Then another hand, and another. 5 hands. My heart stopped. Every window along the row began to fog, as if someone were breathing from within. Silhouettes moved, slow, heavy, shifting closer to the glass. And then the doors began to open, all 5 of them, one after another, creaking in perfect rhythm. I ran. I don't even remember my feet hitting the ground. I just remember the sound, the hum turning into a roar, the air thick with static, my flashlight swinging wildly as I sprinted back toward the van. When I reached it, the headlights flickered on by themselves. The radio crackled to life. Through the static, I heard my own voice again, breathless, panicked, whispering words I hadn't yet spoken. Please let me leave. The van's engine sputtered, then caught. I floored the accelerator. As I tore down the cracked road, I looked into the rearview mirror. I shouldn't have, but I did. The park wasn't dark anymore. It was glowing. Each RV burned with the same faint orange light, as if lit from within by fire. Figures stood in front of them again, but now I could see their faces, burned, hollow, flickering like they were made of smoke. One of them, a man with no eyes, just black sockets, raised his hand and pointed directly at me, and then everything went black. I don't remember losing consciousness. One moment I was driving, the next I was waking up on the side of the highway, engine idling, morning light spilling across the windshield. My phone was on the passenger seat. Full signal, no missed calls. When I checked the mileage, I realized something else. I'd driven less than a mile, but the van's tires were caked in soot. For days afterward, I told no one. I tried to move on, but the humming never left me completely. Sometimes, when I park the van at night, I feel it again, faint, just under the surface, like the earth itself remembers. I think about those families, about how they burned, how the sound that night might have been their final cry for help echoing through the metal and wires, and I think about why they told me to stay. Maybe it wasn't a threat. Maybe it was a warning. Because when you spend enough nights on the road chasing silence, you realize the past doesn't stay buried in the dirt. It hums beneath your wheels, waiting for you to stop long enough to hear it. And if you ever find yourself near an old RV park with broken lights and cracked pavement, and you hear that faint vibration rising through the ground, don't stay. Drive before the road forgets where you came from.